emergency.
A 911 call comes in reporting a residential house fire. Their flames are 30 feet in the air.
It had a attached garage. We didn't see a vehicle, but we always prepare that there could be someone home.
Chief Dan Mizak sends his team inside to put out the fire. And they're immediately overcome by black smoke, making everything almost invisible. But through the thick black smoke, they see something in the living room that no firefighter wants to see.
I could just see them bring a body out. Almost looks like a mannequin just being brought out.
Paramedics come forward and try to resuscitate her, but she is in fact deceased.
Nothing stood out about the fire. It seemed like an everyday run to us. But what it turned out to be in the end was definitely a twist and a turn.
A lot of murderers are emotional when they take a life. Not him. He didn't feel anything because he's cold as ice. Somewhere is the guy who killed this woman. Let's find him and burn him to the ground.
My name is Mike Danowitz, and I'm a retired lieutenant with the prosecutor's office in Middlesex County, New Jersey. Originally, I was an officer with the Sheriff's Department, and I really became fascinated with the investigative process. In the homicide unit, when your victim dies, their opportunity to tell their story dies with them. That's now your job. That's your responsibility.
I've had a lot of cases with Detective Danowitz. He put the work in. He never shied away from, getting his hands dirty and doing what needed to be done. He was dedicated.
So in 2011, I was on call the week of Valentine's Day, and I get a call in the late afternoon, early evening that there was a fire in Avenel and a resident home had died.
So they ask him to go to the fire scene and see if there's something there. Danowitz arrives at the scene of this fire, and he is told that the fire was confined to the living room area. They discovered a person in that area on the floor.
The victim was identified as Balwinder Carr. She was a resident of the house.
She's 44 years old. She is Indian. She is married and is the mother of two children, one 17-year-old boy and one 20-something girl, and she is the only resident in the house at the time the fire occurred.
My mom is from North India, Punjab. She went to school and did a little bit of farming. Life back then was really hard for them. They were very poor.
Balwinder Kaur has emigrated to this country with her husband to seek the American dream.
My parents came here in 1990, had me, my brother. My dad was a chef at a restaurant. Then eventually he partnered up with his brother and his cousin and bought a Indian restaurant in the city. And he also partnered up with one of his friends and got 2 to 3 gas stations over time.
They came here and built that business up. So very hardworking people, very hardworking people.
We lived in Elmhurst, Queens. Then when I turned 20, we moved to New Jersey. It was part of my mom's dream. She wanted to buy a brand new house. The biggest reason why I believe they came to America is for us. They knew that if they have kids, they have a better opportunity in America than they would have in India. And we did.
So at that point, it was decided we were going to do a scene assessment and evaluation. We walked through the entire home. It was a hot fire, mostly located in the living room. The drywall contained it, but the contents of the home were severely damaged.
Danowitz looks around this house. It's in perfect order. There's no evidence of a search or being ransacked in a burglary.
There was no forced entry. The door was open. There was no other windows or doors broken into.
Could this be an accident? Of course. Is it one? Well, that's what we're here to find out.
There was nothing just standing out that would have caused this fire. We had the state fire marshal come in with a canine, and there was no indication that there was any sort of accelerant used to start this fire.
Danowitz has seen these scenes many times, and he feels that there's just something odd about this one. He can't put his finger on it. If it's an accident, that's one thing. If it's an arson, it's someone who knows what they're doing.
Firefighters were describing to us how she was located. In the center of the living room, in close proximity to the front door. Why was this woman not able to get out of her living room? Did she, get disoriented in the smoke and not know where the front door was? None of it really quite made sense at that point.
But when they analyze the floor, they find something that might explain what happened here.
There's a distinct pattern on the floor that did not burn where the body had been found. It tells us the victim was there on the ground prior to the fire taking over the entire room.
Why are you there before anybody ignites anything? Is this a murder? Danowitz is hopeful that the coroner is going to have an answer for him as to what this is.
She was burned pretty bad. Her facial features were very distorted.
90% third-degree burns. They don't look human. They look like something else entirely. It is the nature of homicide investigation to see things that you can never unsee. And I truly wish I could unsee everything I've ever seen.
When speaking with the medical examiner, we learned that Balwinder's hand had a surface scratch, and it opened up or gaped, as we would say, because her body was exposed to high heat. She had no soot in her nose, she had no soot in her lungs, so she was absolutely deceased before the fire was set.
When examining the neck area, he discovers evidence of deep bruising in the neck muscles. But if you grip the neck with the intent of applying force, your thumb is in the front of the throat and 4 fingers are behind. Exactly where the bruises are in our victim. That's an indication of manual strangulation.
I was like, are you kidding me? Whoever killed Balwinder set the contents of this home on fire in an effort to destroy her body and to put up the fake guise that this was an accident. She accidentally died in a house fire. Only a monster would do that.
We're in a very quiet area, so to find something like this to happen in one of our fires was very shocking.
The next question is, who would do such a thing? Who does this? At that point, it's go time.
The key in any homicide investigation is tell me about the victim. So we begin there, closest people to the victim.
Balwinder's daughter, Capri, was away at college at the time, and she had to have a ride from a family member to bring her back to New Jersey.
I remember sitting with Mike, and my brother and my dad were there, and he told us that my mom was murdered, and I just stared at him, and I was shocked, and I'm like, what are you talking about? Definitely the worst thing that I've ever experienced in my life.
They were devastated, very devastated. Capri became pretty much the spokesperson of the liaison between the family and myself.
For my dad, he was just numb. And my brother, he was just out of it. He just didn't want to be anywhere near the house or with us. So I couldn't break down, because if I did, who was going to lead?
To face the emotional torture of the loss of her mother and still try to help the police find out who's responsible for this crime. That's a very brave thing for a 20-year-old girl to do.
Mike Danowitz, he had told me when I met him that he would treat this case as if he was doing this for his own mother. And it actually felt like he was on our team trying to find who did this to my mom.
Those words motivate me. You made a promise to that family. I'm going to do what I got to do here. The big question was, who does she know that would want to do something like this to her?
Everyone has the ability to take a human life. That includes your loving mother, your loving daughter. All they require is the proper motivation.
We spoke with Balwinder's husband, and he was in Manhattan at the time of this fire. There was no reason to suspect him of anything.
He's out. The daughter is away at college during the time frame of the murder. But there's someone else that lives in this house. He's 17 years old. His name is DP.
So I then spoke with Belwinder's son. And I've got to press him a little bit. And I have to ask some questions and find out and get a feel for what was this relationship like. It's not easy, but it has to be done.
As a homicide detective, you have to become heartless. Your mission is to find out who took a life. If I'm not pushing you, I'm not doing my job.
So my brother was actually the last person to see my mom before all of this happened.
He said, my mom was home alone when I left at 3 o'clock, and she was fine. The house was fine. She was making dinner for my dad.
Danowitz says, so yesterday afternoon, the fire alarm came in at 4:49 p.m. Where were you at 4:49 p.m.? And his reply is, I don't know. Excuse me?
His story isn't adding up.
Danowitz is faced with a kid who's lying his keister off, so it's time to push all the way.
Tunneling down a little bit on the conversation, come to find out he was meeting a young lady from outside of their culture. And that might not have been something that was acceptable back at home, so he was a little bit afraid of exposing himself to that.
In our culture, we are not allowed to date or have boyfriends and girlfriends. Before I went to college, I could not even tell my mom that I had a guy friend. Not a boyfriend, just a friend. I couldn't tell her.
So he has a terrific reason to lie.
He said that he had left about 3 o'clock to go meet a girl from high school. We met with the young girl, and in fact, it checked out.
So it's not DP, then who is it?
I needed to determine, is there something missing from the home? Was there, a theft involved? I mean, this was a beautiful home, beautifully furnished, nice cars in the driveway.
The 20-year-old daughter, Gurpreet, she volunteers to do the walkthrough with Danowitz.
When we walked into our house, everything was just black, like there was soot all over. Even just talking about it, I remember the smell. It was just, I never want to smell that again.
Danowitz asked her the question, does your mother always keep the door locked? Gurpreet says, absolutely.
She was very skeptical about things. She wouldn't even open the door for a person she didn't know.
That's a very important point. That narrows the field of suspects dramatically if she willingly opened the door.
She explained that, there really wasn't a lot kept in the home. And I asked her about jewelry. Did your mom keep jewelry in the house? Did she wear jewelry? And she said, well, my mom wore bangle bracelets. They were 22 karat gold. They came from India.
They weren't that big or thick, so just like 2 skinny bracelets that she would wear on a normal day.
At the time of the autopsy, the only thing that was listed on her was 1 earring that was recovered from her body. Those bangle bracelets were missing.
Danowitz immediately thinks about the autopsy, saying there was a scratch on the hand. What if it was a scratch because the person pulled off those bracelets?
Gurpreet explained to me there were a set of 6. So my next question to her was, okay, these 2 are missing. Where are the other 4? And she says, we keep them in a strong box with some other jewelry. I can get them for you. And she placed down 4 bangle bracelets. To the human eye, they all looked identical. And these were hand-etched in a design and very, very attractive, very pretty. So the first thing I wanted to do was photograph them.
Now we have a lead. We have a lead on jewelry.
This high-carat, expensive gold jewelry, which somebody who needed money would be very interested in.
So the next step is to hit the pawn shops.
I had a flyer made up that showed them in 2 views, very distinctive, the design. And we began to canvass area shops looking for a place of business that bought bangle bracelets just like this one. I visited personally probably about 70 pawn shops all throughout the area.
New Jersey is a large place. New York is even bigger. You can be on a train to New York in 30 minutes. Who knows if you're ever going to find the pawn shop where that was sold.
So you're looking to really find a needle in a haystack.
Danowitz is going to have to find a different approach because this one is not going to work.
Again, the question kept coming back. Who would come to the door that Valwinder would feel comfortable enough to open the door for? We came to find out that there was a plumbing issue a few days earlier and that the builder had sent a repairman.
So Danowitz finds that interesting because it's not uncommon for people who are workmen are also criminals.
So we wanted to talk to that person because that was someone who probably, if she opened the door for once, she may be willing to do so again. We identified the repairman. We spoke with him. He was very cooperative. He was very complimentary of, how easy it was to go there and make the repair.
So Danowitz says, "Where were you on Valentine's Day?" Well, he left work early because he took his wife out and he had receipts to prove it.
We checked his story, did a little investigative work, and he had no involvement in anything. Unfortunately, once again, we're right back where we started.
The advantage in the modern day is this country is under surveillance. Big Brother is just around the corner. Danowitz knows this.
About 750 feet away from where this occurred, there were traffic cameras to catch red light violations. Was there someone moving extremely fast, trying to get out of the area? We had put in a request to get that footage. Didn't see anything unusual about it. Put it on a shelf and moved on. So at this point, I'm 8 days into this and I have nothing. Absolutely nothing. You feel the pressure because, the farther away you get on the timeline from an incident, the harder it gets.
Mike was giving me updates. He went every direction that he could go, and I appreciated it.
I've never brought anybody back from the dead. So the only thing I can give them is some sort of justice and closure. And I'm not doing a very good job of it.
One thing after another fails to work. You've got to push through that. Danowitz knows that. There is no quit in him. That's why he's a good homicide detective. He doesn't know how to stop. Somewhere is the guy who killed this woman. Let's find him.
The next day, I come into my office and I was at my desk and I got a call from a person by the name of Tommy App.
My name is Tommy App. I'm a retired firefighter and arson investigator for the borough of Carteret, part of Woodbridge Township. It was located right next to Carteret, a stone's throw away. I called Mike Danowitz, of which I had no dealing with prior to this case. I explained to him that I was aware of the fire in Avenel that happened on Valentine's Day.
He says, "I've got information on your murder," and Danowitz says, "You do?"
I said, "I don't know if this is a grain of sand on the beach or whether this is the straw that's going to break the camel's back."
And he said, "Mike, I had an incident that happened the other day at a delicatessen. And I run into this woman I know from town. I used to coach her children in Little League sports. And she says to me,
'Hi, Coach Tommy, how are you?' Just very nice. We had small talk, as usual, and she mentioned to me, 'Did you hear about the fire in Avenel?' I told her, yes, I did.
And she says, 'Well, Valwinder and her family are friends of my husband.' And he says, 'Mike.'
At that point, the little hairs on my neck stood up.
He says, and I'm going to tell you why. Her husband is Harpal Singh. Harpal Singh is a common denominator or a person of interest in 8 suspicious fires in my town.
With Mr. Singh, every one of those fires, he was a renter. He was either residing in that residence or family members were part of that residence. In the early going, all of them were small. One was in a box outside of an air conditioner. Another was a flower plant underneath a deck. The 8th fire was the big one. It pretty much destroyed the whole house and the 2 cars that were in the driveway. I did coach both of his sons with baseball. We had a good personal relationship. I was not looking at him as a suspect. I was looking at him more as a victim. And I said to him, I says, who do you owe money to? You know, who'd you piss off? Whatever it was, he clammed up. That's where I realized he was the suspect. He was no longer the victim.
The average person might experience a fire event once in a lifetime. If you are involved in 8 fire incidents, you're either lemony snicket, suffering an unfortunate series of events, or you are one dangerous individual.
He says, Mike, this guy's a firebug. He's got something to do with these fires.
There was no file against the insurance company, so there's no benefit to him. What is his motivation?
Mr. Singh was not charged with anything. I had him in the church, but I just could not put him in the first pew with the evidence that I had.
So Harpal Singh potentially knows the victim and is linked possibly to 8 arson fires. 2 and 2 still adds up to 4. Was Balwinder Core fire number 9?
So once I get off the phone with Tommy App, we run a check on Harpal Singh to identify who he is.
Harpal earns a simple and humble living as a truck driver.
He just seemed to be one of those down on his luck kind of guys who, you know, was scraping the bottom of the barrel.
So I wanted to find out from the family if what Tommy's information checks out. I met with Capri and her brother. I said, Capri, do you know someone by the name of Harpal Singh? And she said to me, yes. He's a friend of our uncle.
Harpal had come over to our house a few weeks before. My uncle was at our house and he just decided to come. And I think that was the first time he got the opportunity to come into our house. And my dad, he's proud of himself for getting a house. It's a big deal for somebody that's coming from a different country with no money. So he was very boastful. He was showing him around the house.
So he would have been familiar with what property they may have had. He knew enough about the family to know that the husband was involved in cash businesses so that there may be money there.
Danowitz turns to the son. Do you know this guy? Harpal Singh? Oh, yeah. In fact, I saw him recently just before the fire. You did? Where'd you see him?
He said that on February 10th. He was coming home from school, and when he got to the driveway, Harpal Singh was standing in the driveway.
He hadn't rung the doorbell, hadn't knocked. He was just standing there. And Harpal said, my truck got heated up and I need water. And my brother kind of looked around. He didn't see the truck, but he didn't think a lot of it.
What happened then? DP says he gave Harpal a jug of water and then he left.
I says, but you never seen a truck overheating? No. And immediately something's not right. What are the odds that in the dead of winter, this man's vehicle is overheating and to have this problem front and center in front of their home?
So now, Mr. Harpal Singh, Mr. Fire Guy, he's in the driveway 4 days before this woman is murdered with a very bad story about needing water for a vehicle.
Not only do I have this history of him and fires, but now I know that he's been to the home, he's been in the presence of Balwinder, and she knows him and probably would open the door for him. So it fit.
Danowitz's experience tells him if it walks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it's a duck. Harpal Singh has got some explaining to do. So now Danowitz has his hands on a family acquaintance who has a tendency to be in a scene of fires, to the tune of 8 of them. Has he been involved in number 9?
I touched base with my sergeant, and we went to go pay Harpal a visit. We came to the door. I said, hi, Mr. Singh. I'm doing an investigation about a fire that occurred. I understand that you're acquainted with the family.
It's in the interest of Danowitz to make Harpal believe This is just a low-ebb interview. I'm interviewing all the people that knew the family.
I asked him just the basic stuff. How did you come to know the family? How long have you been acquainted with them? And then eventually, when was the last time you were there? And his response was like 2 or 3 days before. And I stopped there to get water for the truck. He seemed pretty matter of fact. Didn't seem nervous. He appeared to be cooperative, Didn't look like he was trying to hide anything.
So Danowitz asked Harpel what he was doing on Valentine's Day the 14th. He said he was at work.
I said, okay, walk me through your day. I got up, I took my kids to school, I go to work. After work, I went to Keyport, New Jersey. Keyport is located about 22 miles from where this house fire was.
Harpel Singh is an over-the-road truck driver. He says he bought a tractor-trailer from a dealer in Keyport, New Jersey, and he owes him money on it. So he had gone out there to make a payment and then went straight home.
And then he started to mention to me, listen, my boys are getting out of school. I said, okay, Harpel, give me a minute. And I grabbed the sergeant. I said, listen, do me a favor, go outside, take a bunch of pictures of that van before he gets in it and leaves.
It's a white van, and it had a painted sign on the side of the van, but he just covered it up with silver duct tape.
We got the pictures, and Harpel, listen, we may be in touch with you down the road. If I need you, I can call you. Yes. And he left. In the meantime, the sergeant calls Harpel's employer and gets the timesheets for the week of Valentine's Day. And lo and behold, those timesheets indicate that Harpel Singh is off. He didn't work on Valentine's Day. So I've been lied to for sure.
I love liars deeply. People lie for a reason. Particularly when there's somebody dead nearby, they tend to lie a lot.
I wanted to find out, okay, if he's not at work, was he in Keyport? I mean, where was he? So he had provided us the information of who he bought the truck from.
Danowitz drives to where this used truck dealership is. He says, you have a customer named Harpel Singh.
When I said that, immediately, yes, I know him. I sold him a tractor trailer. He gave me a deposit of so much money.
Harpel Singh owed $19,000 in full on this truck and was making payments. But according to the dealer, he had recently fallen behind.
The salesman says, I gave him an ultimatum. I said, if I don't have some of the money or at least a substantial part of it, I'm going to take the truck back. You got till February 10th.
He says Harpel called him on the 10th and said he could not arrange the money. So the dealer said he would give him until Monday the 14th, Valentine's Day, to make the payment.
I said, did he come Monday? He says, yes. And he only had $1,000, and I was not happy.
He had significantly less money than he had indicated he was going to bring, and he appeared to be drunk at the time.
Danowitz is now looking at the dates, the 10th and the 14th of February. Well, that's very odd. The 10th was the day that Harpel Singh was in the driveway at the house when the son came home from school, and the 14th was the day of the murder.
And the bell went off in my head. He needs money, and Valentine and her family had some. It certainly fits the scenario. Now, there is somewhat of a motive here. For the first time in almost 2 weeks, I'm finally getting somewhere. The stars are lining up now.
So Danowitz goes back to his office to review those traffic pattern cameras he got from the area of the crime scene. Now he knows what he's looking for, a white van with silver duct tape. How unique is that?
I go through the video that shows the street about 750 feet away from where this fire took place. And I begin to watch the traffic flow through, the traffic stop. 447, 448. And I say to myself, well, this is the 911 call right now. And no sooner than I said that, his van pulls up and stops at the red light, plain as day.
I'll never forget watching the evidence. You can actually see the brake lights flickering on and off. You can tell that he's so stressed and anxious for the light to turn green. He wanted so bad to get out of there.
There is no doubt 100% who this is. I could almost see him in the van. And I'm like, are you kidding me?
What are the odds? Another person having a white van with silver duct tape a block away from the victim's home at the moment the fire call comes in. It's about the same as a guy that has 8 fires in 8 different houses he lives in. There is no one else. There is Harpel Singh. Period. The end. When a case starts to roll, it is euphoric. You've been wondering all this time, not anymore. It's time to reel in Mr. Harpel Singh and have a long and pointed conversation with him about his difficulties in this matter.
We made arrangements to meet a second time at the Woodbridge Police Department. He wasn't resisting. He was like, okay. And he even called us sir. So we sit down with him and say, Harpel, there's been some developments, and, I don't think you were truthful with us. We called where you work. They said you didn't work on Valentine's Day.
Harpel's immediate answer is, well, he's got the dates wrong. I mean, I was working that day.
So I said, listen, let me finish. We have pictures of your van. I actually got out a computer laptop. I showed him the video.
Detective Danowitz pointed out to him, well, look, that's clearly your van. He basically would just respond, well, why do I have to be there?
I said, what does that even mean? He says, you're telling me I was there. I says, I am telling you there because I saw it with my own 2 eyes. You know what I know. And we went round and around for the longest time over this.
He has an answer for everything that Danowitz hits him with. None of it, of course, makes any sense because he's making it up as he goes along.
Harpel Singh did have an arrogance about him. I think he thought that he was the smartest person in the room, and in that case, clearly he wasn't.
He never cooperated with us. It was deception and a blind stare. And it was like, all right, let's call it a day. And I said, Harpel, listen, we're probably going to talk again. He was like, okay, yes, whatever you need, sir. Same thing. And he left. At that point, I want to charge this guy, but we need something linking him to the scene. We got to put him there. We need something more. So now I have enough probable cause to get a warrant for his cell phone records. And I find out through that he, in fact, was at the area of the fire at the time. And then he went in an area we call Little India.
There's one section of Edison that has a very, very large Indian population, a lot of clothing stores, restaurants, jewelry stores.
There's about 24 jewelry stores that specialize in buying and selling Indian 22-karat gold.
Danowitz realizes that he was looking in the wrong place. He was looking in pawn shops. Now he's going to go to Little India and look in the right place. Jewelry stores that buy gold.
We went to every store, myself and a bunch of detectives with that flyer, and I get a call from a Woodbridge detective. He says, I think we got something up here at one of these jewelry stores. There's a girl here, and she says she bought a bangle bracelet just like this about a week ago, and she bought it from a guy. By the time I had gotten there, the owner had showed up, had found the transaction receipts.
In New York and New Jersey, a photo ID is required to sell something in a jewelry store. So out comes the sales record, a copy of that ID, and it's none other than our hero, Harpel Singh. Shows his photograph, his date of birth, and his current address that hasn't burned down yet. It's him.
And we had him. Actually, a little choked up. We had him. We had him.
When he was arrested, Danowitz's attempt to interview, of course, he lawyered up. That's good, Harpel. You're probably going to need one of those. You might even need 2 of them.
Mike called me and he told me that he had arrested Harpel, and I think we were just surprised, not even shocked, like really surprised, because we weren't thinking it was him at all.
Only Harpel Singh knows what prompted his attack on Balwinder Kaur, but we have an idea.
Harpal had bought a truck, a cab, for an 18-wheeler on credit, and he had money due, and he didn't have the money to make the payment.
The opinion of the arson investigators was only an opinion, not provable. He was experimenting on how to start fires and have it not look like an arson. The first 7 fires, in their opinion, were experimental.
Prior to the 8th fire, he supposedly took out a life insurance policy on his wife and his 2 sons. I think the end goal was to kill his 2 sons and his wife for money.
That whole plan, if it was such a plan, didn't work. He was never charged with that crime, nor was he charged in relation to the 8 fires. But the facts certainly make you wonder. So he comes up with another plan. He remembers Ballwinder's family being so successful.
He was under the impression that these people had money and maybe had, the answer to his problems within their home. It's pretty obvious this was supposed to occur on February 10th. Our pal shows up in that driveway, and unbeknownst to him, bad timing, Valwinder's son arrives from school, and now he is left on a short notice to come up with why he's there. And the best he can do is this story of the overheating truck.
Nothing's wrong with the van. Something is deeply wrong with Mr. Singh.
He had an extension until Monday, which was Valentine's Day, for the money, which he could not arrange on the 10th. He was going to make sure this time that that didn't happen again. I think he went in under the guise of being friendly. And I think at some point he grabbed Valwinder and said, "Where do you keep your money?" And I don't think she had anything to give him.
A lot of people that own gas stations, they have money at home. But my dad didn't have it because he wasn't really involved in the gas stations. It was his partner. He was more into the restaurants, but this is something I think Harpal didn't know.
He tries to strangle the information out of her, and it doesn't happen. Now it's time to panic. He rips the gold bracelets off her wrist, scratching the back of her hand in the process, then quickly thinks about how to cover his tracks.
Fire is his thing, and that's how he was going to erase his footsteps. He was going to burn the house down, and everybody was supposed to think that Valwinder died in a tragic fire. And then he goes up to what we call Little India to try to sell the gold bracelets. He basically then left Little India with whatever he had and went to make a minimal payment as to what he owed on this tractor trailer to the salesman.
I mean, how could this guy do this? This was a guy that I knew personally. I considered him a friend. I realized he was a wolf in sheep's clothing.
Harpal Singh is charged with first-degree murder. He was charged with aggravated arson. He was charged with theft, and he was charged with hindering his own apprehension. Harpal Singh stood before a jury trial, and after a very good presentation of our case, the jury found him guilty on all counts and convicted him.
Harpal Singh was sentenced to life in prison in the state of New Jersey, where he remains to this day.
Some of my families wanted the death penalty for him. I don't. I want him to be in jail for the rest of his life so he lives that life.
When all was said and done, Caprit wrote me a letter on behalf of her family, and just very, very, kind words.
Mike was very, very diligent. He told me he was going to find who did this to my mom, and he did what he promised.
I'm glad that we were able to get her some justice.
I think the hardest part of this whole thing for me was when we cremated her. Because that's it. She was gone afterwards. My mom would be very proud of where I am right now. I'm earning good money. I have a house that's nice. My husband's great. My in-laws are wonderful. She's never gonna see that life for me. And I hate that. And most importantly, my daughter's never gonna know who her grandmother was. She's just gonna see pictures and that's it.
Balwinder Kaur was a victim of her own success. There was no way for Balwinder Kaur to know that this individual would do her harm. Bad things happen to nice people. The saddest thing about my work, all of my years of it, was that fact. On the next American Detective.
There was so much blood in that bed that you couldn't make out whose blood was whose.
There's been a murder.
It made the hair on my neck stand up.
This is beyond the pale. He doesn't want to just kill him. He wants to erase him.
The night it happened, the wind scraped across the empty streets like a whisper that refused to die, carrying with it the echo of a scream no one would ever admit to hearing. And in a quiet Texas town where porch lights usually burned until dawn, one house stood dark, its door ajar, its silence heavier than any sound, a silence that would soon become a wound carved into the memory of an entire community. It was just after midnight when the first patrol car rolled slowly past the address, headlights sweeping across a driveway still warm from the engine of a car that should not have been there, and for a moment, the officer behind the wheel hesitated, sensing that something about the stillness was wrong, that this was not the peaceful sleep of a small town, but the held breath before a storm. Inside, the air was thick, unmoving, saturated with the metallic tang of fear and something darker, something that clung to the walls, the furniture, the photographs frozen in time. In the living room, a lamp lay shattered, glass scattered like a trail of frozen sparks. A chair was overturned. A clock on the wall ticked loudly, absurdly, its steady rhythm mocking the chaos that had just unfolded. In the hallway, a single shoe rested on its side, abandoned mid-step, as if its owner had vanished in the middle of motion. And in the bedroom, the bed was stripped bare, sheets gone, pillows missing, leaving behind only a mattress marked by faint impressions, the last fragile evidence of someone who had been there only hours before. Her name was Emily Carter, 26 years old, a schoolteacher who had moved to this town only 3 years earlier, drawn by its promise of safety, of slow mornings and familiar faces, of a place where nothing ever seemed to happen. She was the kind of person people remembered for her laugh, bright and sudden, for the way she stopped to talk to strangers, for the way she believed, stubbornly, in the goodness of others. She lived alone, kept her doors locked, called her parents every Sunday evening without fail. And now, she was gone, erased from her own life in a matter of minutes, leaving behind only questions and a house that looked like it had tried and failed to hold on to her. By sunrise, the street was sealed off, yellow tape snapping in the wind, patrol cars lined along the curb, their lights flashing red and blue against the pale morning sky. Neighbors stood in clusters, arms crossed, voices low, eyes fixed on the front door of Emily's house, waiting for someone to emerge with answers. But no one did. Instead, detectives arrived, moving carefully through the scene, photographing every scuff mark, every displaced object, every invisible trace that might explain how a young woman could disappear from her own bedroom without a single neighbor hearing a thing. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken windows, no pried locks. The back door was unlocked, but undamaged. The front door showed no struggle. It was as if Emily had opened it herself, as if she had stepped willingly into the dark, following someone she trusted or someone she feared. On the kitchen counter, her purse lay open, wallet still inside, cash untouched, keys in their usual place. Her phone, an old flip model, sat charging beside the sink, its screen dark, its final message time-stamped hours before she vanished. A message to a friend. Long day. I can't wait to sleep. The initial theory was simple, almost comforting in its familiarity. A burglary gone wrong. A crime of opportunity. Someone passing through town, someone who saw a lone woman, an easy target. But the deeper investigators dug, the less sense that explanation made. Nothing was missing. No valuables gone. No electronics taken. Not even the small jar of cash Emily kept for emergencies. This wasn't theft. This was something else. Something deliberate. Search teams fanned out across the surrounding fields, along the narrow country roads, through the wooded patches that hemmed in the town. Helicopters swept overhead. Dogs traced her scent to the edge of the driveway, where it simply stopped, cut off as cleanly as if she had been lifted into the air. Volunteers knocked on doors, posted flyers, scoured ditches and drainage canals, combed through abandoned barns and empty lots. For days, then weeks, her face stared back from every storefront window, every telephone pole, every local news broadcast. Have you seen her? But no one had, or no one said they had. The town changed overnight. Parents walked their children to school. Doors were locked earlier. Porch lights stayed on until dawn. Conversations dropped to whispers whenever Emily's name was mentioned. And in that growing fear, suspicion began to bloom. Everyone became a potential suspect. The quiet neighbor, the friendly shop owner, the stranger who had stopped for gas the night she vanished. Detectives interviewed hundreds, tracing every thread of Emily's life, mapping her routines, her friendships, her last known movements. They discovered nothing unusual. No secret relationships. No debts. No threats. No enemies. Just a young woman building a modest life, planning for a future that now existed only in memory. In the weeks that followed, small, unsettling details began to surface. A truck reported idling on a nearby street late that night, its engine humming in the dark for nearly an hour. A blurry gas station security tape showing a man in a baseball cap buying cigarettes at 1:17 a.m., glancing repeatedly toward the door. A neighbor who thought she heard a muffled argument, then convinced herself it was only the television. Each fragment promised answers, then dissolved into uncertainty, leaving behind only more questions, more dead ends. Then, 3 months after Emily vanished, a hiker discovered something in a remote patch of scrubland 20 miles outside town. It was a torn strip of fabric, tangled in thorny brush, faded blue, the same shade as the pajamas Emily had been wearing when she was last seen. Nearby, half buried in the dirt, lay a broken necklace, its clasp snapped, its tiny silver pendant smeared with rust. The items were identified within hours. They were hers, but there was no blood, no remains, no footprints, nothing to explain how they had gotten there, or what had happened beyond that lonely, silent stretch of land. The discovery sent shockwaves through the investigation. It shifted the focus outward, away from the town, toward the endless miles of Texas backroads and open countryside. Roadblocks were set up. Landowners granted access to their property. Divers searched ponds and creeks. Yet every search ended the same way: empty hands, exhausted bodies, and a growing, unbearable sense of futility. Emily had vanished into a landscape too vast, too indifferent, to give her back. As months turned into a year, the case slowed, then stalled. Leads dried up. Witnesses' memories blurred. Tips dwindled to rumors and speculation. The detectives assigned to the case carried it like a weight, poring over files late into the night, replaying every decision, every missed opportunity, wondering what detail they had overlooked, what single moment might have changed everything. But the truth remained stubbornly hidden, locked behind a wall of silence that refused to crack. For Emily's parents, the passage of time was a relentless torture. They left her bedroom untouched, her clothes still hanging in the closet, her books lined neatly on the shelves, as if she might walk through the door at any moment and reclaim them. Every ringing phone set their hearts racing. Every unknown car slowing near their driveway sent a surge of hope, quickly followed by crushing disappointment. They learned to live in a state of permanent uncertainty, suspended between belief and despair, never knowing whether to grieve or to wait. The town tried to move on, but it never fully could. Emily's disappearance became a shadow cast across everyday life, a reminder that safety was an illusion, that beneath the surface of familiar streets and friendly faces, something dangerous had slipped through. Children who had once played freely in the evenings were called home before dark. Community events grew quieter, more subdued. And in the spaces between conversations, the question lingered, unspoken yet omnipresent: What really happened to her? Years passed. New families moved in. Old ones moved away. The case files thickened with dust. The missing person posters faded and peeled, eventually replaced by advertisements and notices for yard sales and lost pets. Officially, the investigation remained open. In reality, it had become a cold case, another unresolved mystery filed away in a cabinet of unsolved crimes. But beneath that formal designation, the story of Emily Carter refused to rest. It lingered in the collective memory, resurfacing in late-night conversations, in anniversary news segments, in the quiet moments before sleep when the mind wandered back to that dark, silent house. Then, almost 2 decades later, without warning, the stillness broke. A routine audit of old evidence uncovered a box that had not been opened in years, its contents catalogued and forgotten, dismissed as inconclusive, irrelevant. Inside were fibers collected from Emily's bedroom carpet, preserved in small, carefully labeled envelopes. At the time, they had yielded no matches, no identifiable source. But technology had changed. Databases had grown. Analytical methods had sharpened. And when those fibers were run through a modern forensic system, they returned a result that made the room fall silent. The fibers matched the interior upholstery of a vehicle registered to a man who had lived less than 3 miles from Emily's home in 2003, a man who had been questioned once, briefly, then dismissed, his alibi accepted, his name crossed off a list of dozens. A man who had since moved away, built a new life, raised a family, and faded into the background of countless other stories. A man no one had thought to look at again. Within hours, a warrant was issued. Investigators flew across state lines, knocking on a door in a quiet suburban neighborhood where children's bicycles lay scattered on manicured lawns and the smell of freshly cut grass hung in the air. When the man opened the door, he looked older, heavier, his hair streaked with gray, his eyes clouded by the weight of years. He listened in stunned silence as they spoke his name, as they told him why they were there, as they read him his rights. Neighbors gathered on sidewalks, phones raised, disbelief etched across their faces as he was led away in handcuffs. The news spread through the Texas town like wildfire. After 19 years of uncertainty, of waiting, of wondering, there was finally movement.
An arrest.
A suspect. A possible answer. But with it came a fresh surge of questions, of doubts, of fears. Had the truth really been hiding so close all along? Could a single piece of overlooked evidence unravel a mystery that had haunted an entire community for nearly 2 decades? And if so, what other secrets lay buried in those forgotten files, waiting for the moment when technology, persistence, and chance would collide? For the people who had lived under the shadow of Emily's disappearance, the arrest was both a shock and a reckoning, a reminder that the past never truly stays buried, that even the coldest of cases can ignite without warning, and that the silence of years can shatter in a single, irrevocable moment, sending echoes rippling outward, stirring memories, reopening wounds, and forcing a town to confront the darkness it had tried, for so long, to forget. The moment his name hit the airwaves, it was as if the town inhaled sharply and forgot how to breathe, the familiar streets suddenly unfamiliar, the past rushing back with a violence that left no room for denial, because this was not a stranger, not a faceless outsider, but someone who had once stood in the same grocery lines, attended the same football games, nodded hello on the same sidewalks, and now, after 19 years of silence, his shadows stretched backward across every memory, staining them with doubt. His name was Daniel Harper, 48 years old at the time of his arrest, a former auto mechanic who had lived alone in a small rental house near the edge of town in 2003, a man remembered as quiet, unremarkable, almost invisible. Back then, he had been interviewed briefly, just another routine check in a town full of routine checks, and he had offered what seemed like a solid alibi. He claimed he had spent the night at home, watching late-night television, then fallen asleep on the couch. No witnesses contradicted him. No evidence tied him to Emily. His file had been closed, stamped, shelved, and forgotten. Now, In a stark interrogation room thousands of miles from the place he once called home, Daniel sat hunched over a metal table, hands cuffed, eyes darting between the two detectives who faced him, their voices calm, measured, relentless. They began with simple questions, retracing his life, his work, his moves from state to state, the slow accumulation of ordinary years. He answered cautiously, choosing his words with care, pausing often, as if searching for the safest version of the truth. But when the conversation drifted back to 2003, to Emily Carter, to that night, something in his demeanor shifted. His shoulders tightened, his jaw clenched, his gaze dropped to the tabletop. They told him about the fibers, about the new forensic match, about how the interior upholstery of his old pickup truck, sold years earlier and presumed lost to time, had left microscopic traces behind in Emily's bedroom, embedded deep in the carpet, invisible to the naked eye yet stubbornly persistent, waiting nearly 2 decades for their moment. For a long second, Daniel said nothing. The room hummed with the faint buzz of fluorescent lights. A camera blinked red in the corner, recording every flicker of expression. And then, slowly, he shook his head. He denied everything. He said he barely knew Emily. Said he had fixed her car once, months before she disappeared. A simple brake job, nothing more. Said he had no reason to visit her house, no reason to hurt her, no reason to take her. He suggested contamination, coincidence, a mistake. He suggested that in a small town, fibers could travel anywhere, carried on shoes, on clothing, on the currents of daily life. He suggested anything but guilt. The detectives listened unblinking. They had heard it all before. They pressed him on details. His movements. His routines. His habits. They asked him to describe that night again, hour by hour, minute by minute. And as he spoke, small fractures began to appear, hairline cracks in the story he had repeated for years. He hesitated when asked about the exact time he went to bed. He stumbled when questioned about what he had watched on television. He contradicted himself about whether he had left the house at any point. Each inconsistency was subtle, easily dismissed in isolation, but together they formed a pattern, a quiet drumbeat of uncertainty. Back in Texas, the town waited, suspended in a strange, electric tension. News vans lined the courthouse steps. Reporters filled cafes and diners, chasing scraps of information, replaying old footage, interviewing neighbors who had not spoken about Emily in years. Some expressed shock. Others confessed to a gnawing sense of unease that they had never been able to explain, a feeling that something about Daniel had always been off, though they could never say why. Memories shifted, rearranged themselves in the light of the arrest, casting ordinary interactions in a sinister glow. Emily's parents were notified in the early hours of the morning. They listened in silence as an investigator explained what had happened, what the evidence suggested, what might come next. When the call ended, they sat together at their kitchen table, hands clasped, staring at the same familiar wall they had stared at for 19 years, the space where hope and despair had wrestled, without resolution. There was relief, yes, but also fear because an arrest was not an answer, not yet. It was only the beginning of another long, uncertain road. As the legal machinery lurched into motion, detectives reopened every box, every folder, every digital file connected to Emily's case. They combed through witness statements, old tips, discarded leads, searching for anything that might now make sense in the context of Daniel Harper. And slowly, fragments that had once seemed meaningless began to align, like scattered pieces of a puzzle finally finding their place. One of those fragments was the idling truck. In the original investigation, a neighbor had reported hearing an engine running late that night, its low rumble drifting through the open window of her bedroom. She had glanced at the clock. 12:43 a.m. At the time, she dismissed it as nothing, just another late return, another restless insomniac. But now, investigators discovered that Daniel owned a dark blue pickup in 2003, its engine known for a distinctive, uneven idle due to a faulty valve. A detail so minor it had never been logged. A detail that now pulsed with significance. Another fragment emerged from a forgotten tip line message, recorded but never fully followed up. A caller had described seeing a truck matching Daniel's parked 2 streets away from Emily's house around midnight, its lights off, its silhouette barely visible in the shadows. The tip had been deemed too vague, too uncertain, lost among hundreds of similar reports. Now, it was pulled from obscurity and examined under a new, unforgiving light. Even the gas station footage took on new meaning. Enhanced with modern software, the grainy image of the man in the baseball cap sharpened just enough to reveal a familiar profile, a subtle tilt of the head, a posture that matched old photographs of Daniel from his mechanic days. It was not definitive. Not yet. But it was close enough to keep the pressure building. With each rediscovered detail, the narrative tightened, drawing a circle that seemed to close inexorably around the man now sitting in a jail cell, staring at concrete walls, replaying a night he had once believed safely buried beneath the weight of time. But the deeper investigators dug, the more complicated the story became. Daniel's past, once unremarkable, began to reveal darker currents. Former coworkers described sudden outbursts of anger, moments of explosive temper that flared without warning. A former girlfriend recounted controlling behavior, jealousy, an incident in which he had grabbed her arm hard enough to leave bruises. Police records confirmed a handful of domestic disturbance calls, none resulting in charges, all filed away, forgotten, minimized. Individually, they meant little. Together, they sketched a portrait of a man capable of violence, a man skilled at hiding it. Still, no body had ever been found. No confession had been made. The central question remained unanswered. What had happened to Emily Carter after she stepped into the night? In the absence of certainty, speculation flooded the vacuum. Some believed she had been killed within hours, her remains hidden in some remote corner of the vast Texas landscape, swallowed by time and terrain. Others clung to the faint hope that she might have survived longer, held somewhere, her fate-sealed days, weeks, months after her disappearance. Each theory carried its own horror, its own unbearable weight. Investigators focused on Daniel's movements in the days following Emily's vanishing. Credit card records showed purchases at hardware stores, rope, plastic sheeting, cleaning supplies. At the time, they had seemed innocuous, unconnected. Now they were chilling. GPS data from toll booths and traffic cameras traced a series of late-night drives into rural areas, far from his usual routines, routes that led into stretches of land so isolated they barely registered on maps. Places where a person could disappear without a trace. Search warrants were issued. Properties he once owned or rented were excavated. Wells were drained. Septic tanks inspected. Acres of scrub and woodland were combed by teams of volunteers, cadaver dogs weaving through undergrowth, noses low, tails stiff. Each search ended in the same devastating way. No remains, no definitive evidence, only disturbed earth and the slow erosion of hope. The lack of physical proof became Daniel's shield. His attorneys seized upon it, crafting a defense built on doubt, on the impossibility of conviction without a body, without a confession, without a weapon. They argued contamination, coincidence, flawed memory, the unreliability of tips filtered through the haze of nearly 2 decades. They painted their client as a victim of technological overreach, a man ensnared by the misinterpretation of microscopic evidence and the desperation of investigators under pressure to solve a long cold case. In response, prosecutors assembled a case from fragments, weaving together fibers, witness statements, behavioral patterns, and circumstantial timelines into a narrative they hoped would convince a jury that the absence of a body did not equate to the absence of a crime. They spoke of motive, of opportunity, of a predatory patience that waited for the right moment, the right vulnerability. They spoke of a town lulled into complacency, of a killer who understood that invisibility was his greatest weapon. As the pretrial hearings unfolded, the courtroom became a theater of restrained emotion. Emily's parents sat in the front row, faces drawn, eyes fixed on the man who might hold the answers they had sought for nearly 20 years. Daniel avoided their gaze, staring instead at the table before him, his expression unreadable. Each day brought new arguments, new revelations, new delays, stretching the process into an agonizing test of endurance. Outside, the town held its breath. Old friendships frayed under the strain of renewed suspicion. Neighbors questioned neighbors. Every memory was re-examined, every interaction replayed. The past, once softened by nostalgia, sharpened into something brittle and dangerous. People wondered what they had missed, what signs they had overlooked, what truths had hidden in plain sight. And beneath it all, the question pulsed, relentless and unforgiving. If Daniel Harper had taken Emily Carter, where had he put her? What had he done with the life he had stolen? What secret had the land been keeping for nearly 2 decades? As winter gave way to spring, and spring to another relentless Texas summer, the investigation pressed on, driven by a grim determination that bordered on obsession. Detectives traveled thousands of miles, chasing rumors and half-remembered conversations, interviewing anyone who had ever crossed paths with Daniel, mapping his movements with forensic precision. Each new lead carried the promise of resolution, and each dead end deep in the sense of dread that Emily's final resting place might never be found. Yet even in that uncertainty, one truth had already emerged with devastating clarity. The case that had once been dismissed as unsolvable, a cold, inert file in a metal cabinet, had awakened, and in doing so, it had torn open wounds that time had only partially healed, forcing a reckoning with the darkness that had always lingered just beneath the surface, waiting for the moment when silence would no longer be enough. The closer investigators pressed, the more the landscape of the past seemed to resist them, as if the land itself had learned how to keep secrets, folding them deep into its soil and shadow, and with every mile driven, every door knocked, every name crossed off a list, the realization settled in that whatever had happened to Emily Carter had been planned, executed, and concealed with a chilling precision that mocked the limits of human persistence. They began by reconstructing Daniel Harper's life in 2003 with forensic intensity, mapping his routines down to the smallest detail, building a timeline that stretched hour by hour across the days before and after Emily vanished, searching for a single moment that might betray him. His job at a local repair shop had given him flexible hours, access to tools, solvents, and heavy equipment, and an intimate familiarity with engines and machinery. Co-workers recalled how he often volunteered for late-night shifts, how he preferred to work alone, how he seemed most comfortable when the world around him had gone quiet. That preference for isolation now seemed less like a personality quirk and more like a rehearsal for something darker. Cell phone records, sparse as they were in that era, showed brief calls placed in the early morning hours following Emily's disappearance, all to payphones scattered across rural counties. The calls were short, no more than a minute or two, their recipients untraceable, their purpose unknown. Investigators theorized that Daniel had been testing lines, confirming alibis, or perhaps simply feeding a nervous compulsion to reach out, to feel some connection in the aftermath of what he had done. Each possibility carried its own unsettling implications. They examined his financial records, discovering a sudden withdrawal of nearly $3,000 in cash 2 days after Emily vanished, a sum far larger than his usual spending. No major purchases followed. The money seemed to dissolve into thin air, as if consumed by a need that left no trace. Detectives wondered if it had paid for silence, for assistance, for the temporary disposal of something too dangerous to keep close. But no evidence surfaced to confirm it, leaving only speculation and a gnawing sense of unfinished business. Then there were the roads. Using old maps, toll data, and witness recollections, analysts traced Daniel's late-night drives across a sprawling network of farm-to-market roads, county highways, and barely marked dirt tracks that threaded through some of the most desolate terrain in the region. These were not random wanderings. They formed patterns, loops that returned again and again to the same remote zones, places few people visited, places where a vehicle could sit unseen for hours, where the dark pressed in so tightly it seemed to absorb sound itself. Search teams returned to those areas, combing through land that had changed little in 2 decades, its stubborn wildness preserving the same isolation it had offered in 2003. They pushed through waist-high grass, hacked at dense brush, and descended into shallow ravines where stagnant water pooled in the shadows. Cadaver dogs worked tirelessly, their handlers watching every twitch of muscle, every subtle shift in posture, hoping for the telltale signal that would finally lead them to Emily. But again and again, the searches ended in silence, in exhaustion, in the haunting emptiness of unanswered questions. With each failed attempt, the weight of uncertainty grew heavier, and the narrative surrounding the case began to fracture. Some locals insisted Daniel could not be guilty, pointing to his years of apparent normalcy, to his steady work, to the absence of any previous violent convictions. Others argued that those very qualities made him more dangerous, a predator who understood the value of blending in, of hiding behind a mask of ordinariness. The town divided along invisible lines, old loyalties clashing with new suspicions, and in the process, the simple comfort of certainty slipped even further out of reach. Amid this tension, a new witness emerged. Her name was Lena Morales, and in 2003, she had been a 19-year-old college student home for the summer, living in a rental house just down the street from Emily. For years, she had kept her memories locked away, convinced they were too uncertain, too fragile to matter. But when she saw Daniel's face on the news, something in her chest tightened, and she found herself replaying a moment she had tried to forget. She remembered standing on her porch late that night, talking on her phone, the humid air clinging to her skin, when she noticed a truck idling across the street, its headlights off, its engine pulsing softly in the dark. At the time, she thought nothing of it. People parked on that street all the time. But then she saw a figure step out, moving quickly, purposefully, toward Emily's house. The porch light flicked on for a second, illuminating the man's profile, his shoulders, the brim of a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. And then the light snapped off, and everything disappeared back into shadow. Lena had told herself it was nothing. A friend, a neighbor, someone dropping by unexpectedly. She went inside, finished her call, and went to bed. By morning, Emily was gone. The memory had haunted her for weeks, then months, before slowly fading beneath the weight of guilt and self-doubt. But now, with Daniel under arrest, the image surged back with terrifying clarity. When detectives showed her old photographs, she hesitated, then pointed. Her voice trembled as she named him. She could not be completely certain, she said, but she believed, with a conviction that made her hands shake, that the man she had seen that night was Daniel Harper. The statement electrified the investigation. For the first time, they had a potential eyewitness placing him at the scene. Prosecutors moved swiftly to secure her testimony, aware that memory could be fragile, that defense attorneys would attack every inconsistency, every hesitation. They arranged for cognitive interviews, carefully guiding her through the recall process, reinforcing details, documenting every nuance. Each session left Lena drained, wrung dry by the emotional toll of reopening a door she had long tried to keep closed. Meanwhile, the defense prepared its counterattack. They hired forensic experts to challenge the fiber evidence, arguing that the match was not unique, that similar upholstery materials had been used in thousands of vehicles across the region. They questioned the reliability of memories nearly 2 decades old, highlighting the well-documented fallibility of eyewitness testimony, especially under the influence of stress and suggestion. They painted Lena as a young woman burdened by guilt, desperate to make sense of tragedy by assigning blame, her recollections distorted by time and media coverage. In court, these arguments collided with the prosecution's narrative in a series of tense, meticulously choreographed hearings. Each side laid out its case, piece by painstaking piece, while Emily's parents sat motionless, absorbing every word, their expressions etched with a mixture of hope and dread. For them, the proceedings were not an abstract exercise in law. They were a brutal excavation of the worst day of their lives, replayed in slow motion, dissected under unforgiving lights. As the trial date approached, a new discovery threatened to upend everything. During a routine inventory of seized property from Daniel's former residences, investigators found a locked metal box tucked inside the crawlspace of a house he had rented briefly in 2005. The box had been overlooked, mislabeled, forgotten. Inside, they discovered a collection of items that sent a chill through even the most hardened detectives. A folded piece of faded blue fabric, its fibers matching those of Emily's pajamas, a tarnished silver pendant, identical to the one found in the scrubland years earlier, and a small notebook filled with cryptic entries, dates, and coordinates, written in a tight, angular script. The implications were staggering. If the items were authentic, if they could be definitively linked to Emily, they would place Daniel in possession of her belongings years after her disappearance, a damning indication of involvement. But the chain of custody was complicated. The box had changed hands. The house had been occupied by multiple tenants. Defense attorneys immediately raised the specter of contamination, of planted evidence, of investigative misconduct. Forensic analysts worked around the clock, testing the fabric for DNA, examining the notebook for fingerprints, in composition and age. The results were tantalizing but inconclusive. Trace DNA consistent with Emily's profile was detected, but degraded, fragmented, vulnerable to interpretation. Partial prints on the box matched Daniel, but his presence in the house was undisputed. The notebook's entries reference locations that investigators were still struggling to identify, some coordinates leading to empty fields, others to private land where access was denied. The case teetered on a knife's edge, balanced between revelation and collapse. As pressure mounted, Daniel's behavior began to change. In custody, he grew withdrawn, speaking less, eating little, spending long hours staring at the wall of his cell. Guards reported hearing him muttering to himself late at night, fragments of sentences, half-formed confessions, apologies that dissolved into incoherent whispers. Psychologists were brought in, evaluating his mental state, probing for cracks in the defenses he had maintained for so long. During one session, he broke down, tears streaking across his face as he spoke of loneliness, of isolation, of a life spent watching others form connections he could never sustain. He spoke of envy, of resentment, of a world that seemed to move forward without him. He did not mention Emily by name, but the weight of her absence hung in the air, an unspoken presence shaping every word. The possibility of a confession loomed, tantalizing, just out of reach. Yet each time investigators pressed him, he retreated, retreating behind denials, behind carefully constructed narratives that left just enough ambiguity to protect him from total exposure. He admitted to knowing Emily, admitted to being near her house that night, admitted to driving aimlessly in the countryside in the days that followed. But he stopped short of admitting to any crime, his statements circling the truth like a predator unwilling to strike. Outside the jail, the town braced itself for whatever might come next. Memorials appeared along the roadside, candles flickering beside faded photographs, handwritten notes curling in the heat. People who had never known Emily left flowers, compelled by a shared need to acknowledge the void she had left behind. For a brief moment, the division softened, united by a common ache, a collective yearning for closure. But closure remained elusive. As trial preparations intensified, the question of Emily's final moments hovered over every discussion, every argument, every whispered conversation in the courthouse hallways. Without her body, without definitive proof of her fate, the story remained incomplete, a narrative with a gaping hole at its center. And in that absence, fear and imagination intertwined, conjuring possibilities too grim to fully articulate. Did she fight? Did she plead? Did she understand what was happening to her? Did she believe, even for an instant, that she might survive? No one could answer. And so the case moved forward, propelled by determination, haunted by uncertainty, carrying within it the unresolved tension of a life interrupted and a truth that refused to fully reveal itself, a truth that lay buried somewhere in the vast, unyielding expanse of Texas, waiting for the moment when silence would finally, irrevocably, give way. The trial opened beneath a sky bleached white by the relentless Texas sun, its glare pouring through the courthouse windows as if intent on exposing every hidden detail, every buried secret, and inside, the air hung heavy with anticipation, thick with the collective breath of a town that had waited 19 years for this moment, a town that now gathered not for celebration, but for reckoning. Daniel Harper entered the courtroom in shackles, his movements slow, deliberate, his eyes fixed straight ahead, avoiding the rows of spectators packed shoulder to shoulder on the wooden benches. He looked smaller than many remembered, diminished by time and captivity, yet the gravity of what he carried made the room feel unbearably tight. Across the aisle, Emily Carter's parents sat rigid, their hands entwined, their faces etched with lines carved by nearly 2 decades of unanswered questions. Between them, an empty space seemed to pulse, an invisible presence marking where Emily should have been. The prosecution began with a voice steady and precise, outlining a story that unfolded like a slow-burning fuse. They spoke of a young woman whose life was interrupted without warning, of a town lulled into false security, of a man who blended seamlessly into that calm until the night he shattered it. They did not rush. They allowed the details to accumulate one by one, building a narrative that tightened with every sentence, drawing the jury deeper into the world of 2003, into the humid darkness of that midnight hour. They described the scene inside Emily's home, the overturned chair, the broken lamp, the missing bedding, the abandoned shoe. They traced the path of the investigation, the early missteps, the overlooked clues, the long years of silence. And then they brought out the fibers, tiny threads sealed inside transparent envelopes, held up to the light like fragile strands of fate, explaining how they had survived vacuuming, foot traffic, time itself, waiting patiently for the science that could finally interpret them. Expert witnesses took the stand, their language clinical, exacting, as they described the chemical composition of the fibers, the statistical improbability of their presence in Emily's bedroom by chance alone. They spoke of microscopic barbs, unique dye signatures, manufacturing patterns so specific they narrowed the possible source to a handful of production runs. And within that narrow window, Daniel Harper's truck upholstery sat squarely, inescapably. The defense rose in response, their tone measured, skeptical, dismantling each claim with practiced precision. They reminded the jury that fibers travel, that they cling to clothing, to shoes, to grocery bags, to car seats and couch cushions, hitchhiking across towns and neighborhoods without permission. They spoke of contamination, of flawed collection methods, of the impossibility of recreating the exact conditions of a crime scene 2 decades later. They urged caution, restraint, reason. They warned against allowing the hunger for closure to override the demand for certainty. When Lena Morales took the stand, the courtroom held its breath. She appeared smaller than her years, her shoulders slightly hunched, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her voice trembled as she recounted that night, the muggy stillness, the soft purr of an idling engine, the silhouette of a man crossing the street toward Emily's house. She described the fleeting flash of porch light, the shape of a face beneath a baseball cap, the way the moment burned itself into her memory, even as she tried to dismiss it. Under cross-examination, the defense pressed hard, dissecting her account, probing for inconsistencies, for hesitation, for doubt. They asked about the years that had passed, about the countless news stories she had seen, the images that might have blurred the edges of her recollection. They suggested the power of suggestion, the influence of hindsight, the human tendency to reshape memory into narratives that make sense of tragedy. And though Lena stood her ground, her uncertainty lingered in the air, a fragile thread stretched taut between belief and skepticism. The notebook emerged next, its cryptic coordinates projected onto a screen above the jury box. Investigators testified about the painstaking effort to interpret its entries, about the hours spent cross-referencing maps, property records, and satellite imagery. They described treks into isolated fields, dense forests, and abandoned quarries, each journey fueled by the hope that this time they would find something, anything, to bring Emily home. But each search had ended in emptiness, the coordinates yielding nothing but dirt, rock, and unanswered questions. Defense attorneys seized on that absence, hammering home the point that no body, no weapon, No definitive evidence of death had ever been found. They spoke of reasonable doubt, of the dangers of conviction based on circumstantial threads, of the irreversible consequences of a mistake. They painted Daniel as a man caught in the machinery of a system desperate for resolution, his life now suspended on the interpretation of fragments too fragile to bear such weight. As days turned into weeks, the trial became a relentless excavation of the past, every witness, every exhibit peeling back another layer of a story that refused to settle into clarity. Coworkers testified about Daniel's temper, his volatility, his isolation. Former acquaintances spoke of uneasy encounters, of moments when his gaze lingered too long, his words edged with bitterness. Yet for every dark recollection, the defense countered with examples of kindness, of generosity, of ordinary human decency, painting a portrait of complexity that defied simple categorization. The jury listened, absorbed, struggled. And beneath the formal choreography of legal argument, a deeper current pulsed, a current shaped not by evidence alone, but by emotion, by empathy, by the raw human need to believe that evil leaves a trail, that cruelty can be proven, that loss can be explained. Outside the courthouse, the town hovered in a state of suspended animation. Businesses closed early. Schools held counseling sessions. Churches opened their doors for quiet prayer. Everywhere, conversations circled back to the same questions, the same fears, the same fragile hope that this ordeal might finally yield an answer. But the longer the trial stretched on, the more that hope wavered, buffeted by the relentless back and forth of accusation and doubt. Late one evening, after a particularly grueling day of testimony, a juror requested to speak privately with the judge. The conversation was brief, sealed, but when court resumed the next morning, the atmosphere had shifted, charged with an indefinable tension. Whispers rippled through the gallery. Speculation flared. Something, it seemed, was about to change. That change came in the form of an unexpected witness. A man named Raymond Cole, a former truck driver who had lived transiently across several states in the early 2000s, stepped forward, claiming that he had information about Daniel Harper and the night Emily disappeared. For years, he said, he had carried a memory that gnawed at him, a fragment of a conversation overheard in a roadside bar somewhere along the Texas-New Mexico border, a place long since shuttered and forgotten. According to Raymond, he had shared drinks with Daniel on a sweltering night in the summer of 2003, days after Emily vanished. They had talked about work, about money, about the monotony of life on the road. And then, as the hours blurred and the alcohol loosened inhibitions, Daniel had said something that froze Raymond's blood. He spoke, Raymond claimed, of a woman who would never be found, of a mistake that could not be undone, of a place so remote no one would ever look. He spoke in fragments, in half-formed confessions that slipped through the cracks of bravado and despair. Raymond had laughed it off at the time, dismissing it as drunken nonsense. But as years passed and Emily's story resurfaced again and again, the words returned, heavier, more insistent, until he could no longer ignore them. The courtroom erupted in murmurs as Raymond recounted his story, his voice rough, his hands shaking. The prosecution seized upon his testimony, framing it as the missing link, the verbal echo of a crime long hidden. The defense attacked with equal ferocity, questioning his motives, his memory, his credibility, his criminal record, his years of silence. They painted him as a man seeking attention, reward, or absolution, a man willing to reshape the past to suit the present. As arguments clashed, the truth seemed to retreat further into shadow, elusive, taunting. And through it all, Daniel Harper remained silent, his expression fixed, his eyes betraying nothing. Yet those closest to him noticed subtle shifts, the tightening of his jaw during certain testimonies, the faint tremor in his hands when the notebook appeared, the momentary closing of his eyes when Lena spoke. Small signs, easily dismissed, yet impossible to ignore. The trial ground on, each day peeling back more layers, each night leaving the town restless, haunted by dreams of unfinished stories and unresolved loss. The weight of Emily's absence pressed down on every proceeding, a silent accusation that no argument could dispel. Then, on the 43rd day, as the final witnesses stepped down and closing arguments loomed, a discovery emerged that threatened to upend everything once more. In a newly excavated section of land, guided by one of the notebook's more obscure coordinates, search teams unearthed a shallow depression, its soil compacted in a way that suggested disturbance long ago. Beneath a layer of tangled roots and hardened clay, they found fragments of fabric, corroded metal, and bone. The news rippled outward with electric force, racing through newsrooms, police stations, and court corridors, reaching the courtroom just as the jury filed in for the day. Gasps echoed. Hands flew to mouths. Emily's parents clutched each other, their faces drained of color. For the first time in 19 years, the possibility of definitive answers stood within reach. And as forensic teams descended upon the site, the town held its breath once more, poised on the brink of revelation, knowing that whatever emerged from that silent earth would forever change the story of Emily Carter and the man accused of erasing her from the world. The excavation site lay beneath a blistering sun, its heat pressing down on the gathered investigators like a physical weight, yet no one moved away, no one complained, no one looked aside, because after 19 years of waiting, the soil itself was finally beginning to speak. Shovels scraped carefully against hardened clay, each stroke deliberate, measured, reverent, as though the earth were a fragile archive that might shatter if handled too roughly. Every fragment lifted from the ground was bagged, labeled, catalogued, its position recorded down to the millimeter, for this was not merely a search for evidence, but a confrontation with a long-buried truth. The first unmistakable sign was the bone. It emerged slowly, pale against the dark soil, its curved surface catching the light, sending a ripple of stunned silence through the search team. Work halted. Cameras clicked. Radios crackled. A forensic anthropologist was summoned, her gloved hands hovering for a moment before touching the fragment, as if bracing herself for what it represented. Preliminary assessment suggested it was human, part of a femur, weathered by time, etched by minerals, but intact enough to hold the promise of identification. As the hours stretched on, more fragments surfaced. Rib pieces, vertebrae, small shards that might once have been fingers. The remnants of clothing appeared next, threadbare, disintegrating at the slightest pressure, their color long since leached away by moisture and decay. A rusted zipper, a metal button, a single plastic bead, dull and scratched, yet hauntingly familiar. The site expanded, the perimeter widening as ground-penetrating radar revealed subtle anomalies nearby. 2 more shallow depressions were discovered, their outlines faint but unmistakable. Each one was excavated with the same painstaking care, revealing further traces of disturbance, as if someone had worked methodically, deliberately, ensuring that no single burial would tell the whole story. By nightfall, floodlights illuminated the scene, transforming the isolated patch of land into a surreal island of brightness amid endless darkness. Technicians worked in silence, their movements precise, almost ritualistic, while state troopers stood guard at the perimeter, their silhouettes etched sharply against the glare. The air smelled of dust and sweat and something older, something that seemed to rise from the soil itself, carrying with it the weight of years. News of the discovery spread with ferocious speed. In the courtroom, proceedings were abruptly suspended. Jurors were dismissed. Attorneys gathered in hushed clusters, their strategies recalibrating in real time. Emily's parents were escorted to a private room, where an investigator, his voice heavy, explained what had been found, what it might mean, and what would come next. They listened in stunned silence, their faces pale, their hands clenched together as if anchoring each other against the tidal wave of emotion threatening to pull them under. For them, the moment was a collision of hope and devastation. The possibility of answers shimmered on the horizon, but it came wrapped in the unbearable reality that their daughter might finally be coming home in the only way she could. Back at the site, forensic teams worked through the night, mapping every discovery, preserving every fragment. Each bone was photographed in situ before being carefully lifted, wrapped, and placed in evidence containers. Soil samples were taken from multiple depths. Insects, roots, and plant matter were collected for later analysis, each a potential clue in reconstructing the timeline of burial. The meticulous process stretched into days. When the remains were finally transported to the State Forensic Laboratory, a hush seemed to settle over the town, as though everyone understood, instinctively, that a threshold had been crossed. The case had moved beyond speculation, beyond inference, into the realm of irreversible truth. The autopsy began under sterile lights, the fragments laid out on stainless steel tables, their arrangement forming the rough outline of a body that once breathed, once laughed, once dreamed. The forensic pathologist worked with solemn precision, examining each piece for signs of trauma, of disease, of identity. Dental fragments were compared to Emily's records. Bone measurements were cross-referenced with her physical profile. Mitochondrial DNA was extracted, amplified, sequenced. The waiting was unbearable. Every hour seemed to stretch into an eternity, each minute weighed down by the collective anxiety of a town poised on the edge of confirmation. News stations ran continuous coverage, analysts speculating, commentators dissecting every known detail, their words echoing through living rooms, diners, and hospital waiting rooms where people sat, transfixed, bound together by a shared sense of dread and anticipation. When the results finally came, they arrived without ceremony. The DNA matched. The remains belonged to Emily Carter. The announcement fell like a thunderclap, reverberating through the courthouse, through the media, through the quiet streets where people paused mid-step, mid-sentence, mid-thought, as if the world itself had stuttered. For her parents, the confirmation was a blade that cut both ways, slicing through nearly 2 decades of uncertainty while opening a wound too deep for words. They wept, not only for the daughter they had lost, but for the years stolen from them, for the life that had unfolded without her. In the courtroom, the case transformed instantly. What had once been a no-body prosecution, balanced precariously on circumstantial evidence, now surged forward with renewed force. Prosecutors amended charges, elevating them to include homicide. The narrative shifted, sharpened, anchored at last to physical reality. The defense scrambled to respond. They challenged the chain of custody, the excavation methods, the integrity of the site. They questioned whether the remains had truly lain there since 2003, or whether they could have been moved, planted, manipulated. They summoned experts to debate decomposition rates, soil chemistry, insect activity, all in an effort to fracture the timeline and sow doubt. But the weight of the evidence was immense. Soil analysis revealed layers of sediment consistent with nearly 2 decades of undisturbed burial. Root growth patterns indicated prolonged entanglement, the slow, inexorable encroachment of nature reclaiming what had been hidden. Insect remnants suggested a summer interment, aligning chillingly with the date of Emily's disappearance. Each scientific detail stacked upon the next, constructing a timeline that pointed inexorably back to that night in 2003. Yet one question remained. How had Emily died? The condition of the bones offered clues but no definitive answers. There were no clear fracture patterns consistent with blunt force trauma.
No bullet fragments. No knife marks.
The hyoid bone, often crucial in cases of strangulation, was too degraded to yield conclusive results. The pathologist could state only that the manner of death was consistent with homicide, the precise mechanism indeterminate. In that uncertainty, imagination rushed in, filling the void with unbearable possibilities. Had she been suffocated? Strangled? Sedated? Had she struggled, clawed at the air, fought for breath beneath a sky she could no longer see? The questions hung unanswered, an invisible shroud draped over every conversation. And at the center of it all sat Daniel Harper. When he was informed that Emily's remains had been found and identified, witnesses later described a subtle but unmistakable change in his demeanor. His posture slumped. His eyes closed for a long, silent moment. When they opened, something had shifted, a hardness replaced by a fragile, trembling calm. He asked for a glass of water. His hands shook as he lifted it. Interrogators saw an opening. They returned to the questioning room, this time armed not only with fibers and timelines, but with the physical reality of Emily's death. They laid out photographs of the site, careful to avoid unnecessary brutality, yet explicit enough to leave no doubt. They spoke of the years her family had waited, of the nights her parents lay awake, of the birthdays and holidays that had passed in silence. They spoke of truth, of accountability, of the possibility of some measure of redemption through confession. For hours, Daniel said nothing. Then, slowly, haltingly, words began to spill out. He spoke of loneliness, of resentment, of a life he felt had stalled while everyone else moved forward. He described watching Emily from afar, noticing her routines, her habits, the times she left for work, the times she returned. He spoke of an obsession that grew quietly, nourished by isolation and fantasy, until it eclipsed reason. On the night she disappeared, he said, he went to her house intending only to talk, to finally bridge the distance he had imagined between them. But the moment spiraled out of control. An argument.
Fear. Panic.
He claimed she screamed. He claimed he tried to silence her. He claimed he never meant to kill her. The room held its breath as he recounted the aftermath. He described driving aimlessly through the countryside, her body wrapped in the bedding he had stripped from her bed, his thoughts fragmented, chaotic, driven by terror and a desperate need to make everything disappear. He spoke of digging in the dark, his hands blistering against the shovel, the soil heavy and unyielding, the night stretching endlessly around him. He described burying her in a shallow grave, then returning days later to move the remains, scattering fragments, creating multiple burial sites in the hope of erasing all trace of what he had done. The confession was incomplete, riddled with gaps and contradictions, but its core was unmistakable. For the first time, a narrative emerged that explained the fibers, the notebook, the scattered remains, the restless drives into the night. For the first time, the town glimpsed the shape of the horror that had unfolded in its midst, unseen, unacknowledged, for nearly 2 decades. Yet, even in confession, uncertainty lingered. Defense attorneys immediately questioned the circumstances under which the statement was obtained, suggesting coercion, exhaustion, psychological pressure. They argued that Daniel's words were unreliable, the product of a broken man desperate to end his own suffering. They pointed to inconsistencies, to missing details, to the absence of any direct admission of intent. But for many, the confession sealed what the evidence had already begun to prove. As news of his statement spread, the town reacted with a complex storm of emotions: rage, sorrow, relief, disbelief. Some felt vindicated, their long-held suspicions finally confirmed. Others struggled to reconcile the man they thought they knew with the monster now revealed. Everywhere, the same question echoed: how had this happened here, among us unnoticed? In the days that followed, Emily's remains were released to her family. A funeral was planned, the first and only ceremony they would ever have, nearly 20 years too late. The town prepared to gather, to mourn, to remember, to lay to rest not only a young woman, but a chapter of its own history marked by fear and unanswered questions. Yet even as preparations were made, the weight of the trial still loomed. Because confession alone would not decide Daniel Harper's fate. That would rest, as it always had, in the hands of 12 ordinary citizens, summoned to judge an extraordinary crime, to sift through layers of evidence and emotion, and to deliver a verdict that would echo through their lives and the life of this town forever. The funeral took place beneath a sky the color of ash, the kind of muted gray that seemed to drain the world of warmth, as if even the sun had retreated in respect for the grief unfolding below. The church overflowed. People stood shoulder to shoulder along the walls, in the aisles, spilling out onto the steps and the street beyond, united by a shared sorrow that had been delayed for nearly 20 years and now arrived all at once, raw and overwhelming. At the front, a single white casket rested beneath a cascade of pale lilies, their fragrance heavy in the air, clinging to every breath. Emily Carter's parents sat in the front row, their faces hollow, their eyes red-rimmed and unfocused, as though still struggling to accept the reality before them. This was the moment they had waited for, prayed for, dreaded. The return of their daughter, not in life, but in death. Around them, friends and strangers alike wept openly, the collective grief forming a low, constant murmur that filled the space between hymns and prayers. Stories were told of Emily's laughter, of her kindness, of the way she stayed late after school to help struggling students, the way she baked cookies for her neighbors, the way she called home every Sunday without fail. Each memory landed like a soft blow, gentle yet devastating, reminding everyone of the life that had been stolen, the future erased. And threaded through every word was the same haunting undercurrent. None of this should have ended the way it did. When the service ended, the procession wound slowly through the streets of the town, passing the school where Emily had taught, the cafe where she spent her mornings, the quiet neighborhood where she had vanished. People stood along the sidewalks, heads bowed, hands clasped, watching in silence as the hearse passed, carrying not only a body, but the weight of unresolved pain, of years lost to uncertainty. Yet even as the town mourned, the machinery of justice continued to grind forward, indifferent to emotion, bound by procedure and proof. In the courthouse, the trial resumed, now infused with a new, relentless urgency. The discovery of Emily's remains and Daniel Harper's partial confession had transformed the case, shifting its center of gravity, but they had not ended the battle. Instead, they had intensified it. The defense moved swiftly, filing motions to suppress the confession, arguing that Daniel had been subjected to undue psychological pressure, that his fragile mental state had been exploited, that his words were the product of coercion rather than truth. They summoned experts in forensic psychology who spoke at length about false confessions, about the human tendency to comply under stress, about the mind's capacity to generate narratives that align with investigators' expectations. The prosecution countered with recordings of the interrogation, transcripts that captured every pause, every shift in tone, every carefully calibrated question. They argued that Daniel had spoken freely, that he had been offered food, water, rest, that he had been reminded repeatedly of his right to remain silent, his right to counsel. They pointed to the specificity of his statements, the way his descriptions matched details known only to the killer, the location of the burial sites, the method of transport, the sequence of events. They insisted that this was not invention, but recollection. The judge listened, weighed, deliberated. And in a ruling that sent a tremor through the courtroom, the confession was deemed admissible. The impact was immediate, electric. Prosecutors reshaped their case around Daniel's own words, weaving them together with the physical evidence, the fibers, the notebook, the eyewitness testimony, the excavation findings. They constructed a timeline that no longer relied solely on inference, but on the defendant's own account of that night, flawed though it was. Each piece reinforced the next, forming a narrative that closed in on itself with suffocating logic. The defense, faced with this shifting terrain, pivoted once more, focusing on intent. They argued that even if Daniel had caused Emily's death, it had not been premeditated, that it was the tragic outcome of a moment gone wrong, an act of panic rather than malice. They spoke of diminished capacity, of emotional instability, of a man overwhelmed by circumstances he could not control. They sought to soften the image of a predator into that of a deeply flawed, broken individual whose actions, though devastating, were not born of calculated evil. But the prosecution would not allow that narrative to take hold. They brought forward evidence of surveillance, of the careful observation of Emily's routines, of the notebook filled with coordinates, of the preparation implied by the purchase of rope, plastic sheeting, and cleaning supplies. They spoke of stalking, of obsession, of a pattern that pointed unmistakably toward planning. They described how Daniel had returned to the burial site, how he had moved the remains, scattering them to avoid detection, actions that suggested not panic, but foresight, a grim determination to evade justice. As arguments collided, The courtroom became a crucible of emotion and logic, each side striving to tilt the delicate balance of perception. Jurors sat motionless, their faces masks of concentration, absorbing testimony that would haunt their sleep, that would follow them long after the verdict was rendered. Some stared fixedly at the witness stand. Others kept their eyes on the evidence displays. A few, unable to bear the weight, closed their eyes, as if seeking refuge in darkness. One afternoon, as the prosecution replayed excerpts of Daniel's confession, the room fell into a silence so deep it seemed to press against the ears. His voice, recorded and distant, filled the space, recounting his actions in halting fragments, each sentence heavy with implication. When he described digging in the dark, the sound of the shovel striking stone, the jury shifted uneasily. When he spoke of driving for hours, searching for a place no one would find, a woman in the front row stifled a sob. And when the recording ended, the echo of his words lingered, suspended in the air, refusing to dissipate. Yet even now, with the case seemingly locked into place, uncertainty remained. The precise sequence of events inside Emily's house was still unclear. Daniel's account shifted subtly with each retelling, details blurring, timelines warping. Did Emily recognize him immediately? Did she trust him enough to open the door without hesitation? Or had he forced his way inside? Did the argument begin in the living room or the bedroom? Had there been an opportunity for escape? Each unanswered question left a small, gnawing void, a reminder that truth, once fractured, can never be fully restored. Outside the courthouse, protesters gathered, their signs a collage of anger and grief. Justice for Emily. No more silence. Never forget. Candlelight vigils sprang up on courthouse steps, in schoolyards, along the roadside near the excavation site. Strangers embraced. Old wounds reopened. The town pulsed with a collective intensity that bordered on desperation, as if by sheer force of will they might compel the universe to offer a measure of peace. But peace was elusive. As the trial neared its conclusion, the defense unveiled its final strategy, the introduction of an alternate suspect. They presented a man named Thomas Keene, a former delivery driver with a history of violent offenses who had lived transiently in the region in 2003. Records showed he had been questioned briefly in the early days of the investigation, his alibi thin, his movements poorly documented. Witnesses placed a similar-looking truck near Emily Street that night. His DNA had never been tested against the evidence, his whereabouts after Emily's disappearance only loosely accounted for. The defense argued that law enforcement, under pressure to close a high-profile cold case, had fixated on Daniel and overlooked other viable leads. They suggested tunnel vision, confirmation bias, a rush to judgment fueled by the allure of technological breakthroughs and dramatic revelations. The prosecution dismantled the claim piece by piece. They demonstrated that Thomas Keene had been tracked through toll records, credit card transactions, and witness statements that placed him more than 200 miles away at the time of Emily's disappearance. They showed that his truck, though superficially similar, bore distinct features absent from the fibers found in Emily's home. They revealed that his DNA, collected during an unrelated arrest years later, did not match the trace evidence recovered from the scene. Still, the introduction of an alternate suspect achieved its intended effect. It unsettled the narrative, injecting a final dose of doubt into an already fraught deliberation. The jury, now burdened with the full weight of the case, prepared to withdraw and decide. Closing arguments unfolded like a duel. The prosecution spoke of Emily's life, of the 19 years of waiting, of the evidence that had finally pierced the veil of silence. They urged the jury to look beyond technicalities, to see the cohesive whole, the pattern of behavior, the convergence of proof. They asked for justice, not vengeance, for a verdict grounded in reason and conscience. The defense countered with a plea for restraint, for skepticism, for the unwavering application of reasonable doubt. They warned against the seductive pull of narrative closure, against the danger of mistaking probability for certainty. They asked the jury to remember that a man's life hung in the balance, that error, once made, could never be undone. When the judge finally instructed the jury and sent them to deliberate, the courtroom exhaled as one. Hours passed, then a full day, then another. Inside the jury room, 12 ordinary citizens grappled with extraordinary questions, sifting through mountains of evidence, replaying testimony, debating interpretations. Voices rose, fell. Tempers flared, cooled. Alliances formed, fractured. The gravity of their task bore down on them, each aware that their decision would reverberate far beyond those walls. Outside, the town waited, suspended in a tense, fragile stillness, haunted by the knowledge that whatever verdict emerged, nothing could truly restore what had been lost. And in that waiting, the silence once more thickened, heavy with the echo of a night that had begun all of this, a night whose shadows still stretched long across the present, refusing to release their hold. Night draped itself over the city like a massive funeral shroud. Dim streetlights cast trembling shadows across rain-soaked asphalt, their reflections quivering like anxious heartbeats. In the police archive room, the dry rustle of turning pages echoed steadily, slicing through the suffocating silence. Inspector Lamb sat motionless at his desk, a thick stack of dust-covered files spread before him. A case from 15 years ago, long believed to be buried, had suddenly risen again, like a beast awakened from a cursed sleep. Every page, every crime scene photograph, carried the icy breath of the past. Victim, Nguyen Hai, an 19, university student, disappeared on a rainy night. Her body was found 3 days later, drifting in a canal in the southern district of the city. Cause of death: drowning. No signs of struggle. Perpetrator: unknown. A cold case. Lamb stopped at the final photograph, Anne's pale face, her eyes gently closed, as if guarding a secret too terrifying to reveal. A chill crawled up his spine. Something was wrong. Deeply wrong. At the same time, in a worn-down apartment on the outskirts, investigative journalist Havai was flipping through yellowed newspaper clippings. She had pursued this case for 2 years, piecing together the smallest fragments of truth. And now, a single fragile thread had begun to unravel the entire mystery. A key witness from the past, Tran Min Kang, Anne's classmate and the last person to see her alive. In his original statement, Kang claimed he left a party early and had no idea where and went afterward. But in a brief article from a local paper that year, a neighbor reported hearing a violent argument between a man and a woman near the canal on the very night and disappeared. The suspect named in that article, Tran Min Kang. Havai photographed the clipping, her heart pounding. Today, Kang was a successful businessman, owner of a luxury restaurant chain, celebrated by the media as a devoted husband and generous philanthropist. A man so perfect it was unsettling. The next morning, Lamb and Havai met at a small cafe across from police headquarters. Outside, a light rain whispered against the windows, each drop sliding down like a silent tear. "Do you believe in intuition?" Havai asked softly, placing her a quarter on the table. Lamb paused, then nodded. "In this line of work, if you don't trust it, you won't survive." She slid the photocopied article toward him.
Kang Lit.
Lamb stared at the faded lines. His pupils narrowed. In his mind, scattered fragments began to align. If Kang was involved, why had the case been closed so abruptly? Who had ordered the investigation to stop? That question led him to a name he had hoped never to revisit: Colonel Hong, the former head of the Criminal Investigation Division, who had retired 3 years earlier. The man who personally oversaw Anne's case. Colonel Huang's house lay deep within a quiet alley. Rusted iron gates. A wooden door slightly ajar. Lamb rang the bell. No answer. He pushed the gate open. A wave of cold air rushed out, carrying the stale scent of dampness and the metallic tang of blood. Inside the living room, Colonel Hong slumped lifelessly in an armchair, eyes wide open, a dried streak of blood trailing from his temple down to his collar. Estimated time of death, approximately 12 hours earlier.
Lamb further.
On the table beside the body lay a brown envelope with no name. Inside was a small slip of paper, hastily written in blue ink. Some truths should never be awakened. Below it was a strange symbol, a downward-pointing triangle slashed by a single line. News of Colonel Huang's death spread like wildfire. The media called it a sudden stroke. But Lam knew better. This was a meticulously staged murder. A witness silenced. Which meant only one thing. The person behind N's case was still alive and willing to kill again to protect the secret. Back in his office, Lam pinned 3 names onto the investigation board.
Nguyễn Hoài An, Chan Minh Khan, Cô Lôn Hoang.
Red strings crisscrossed between them, forming a deadly web. The hunt has begun, Lam whispered. Outside, thunder tore through the sky. A storm was coming, and this time, it would wash away every secret buried for 15 long years. The rain fell harder after midnight, hammering against the streets of the city like a relentless interrogation, as if the sky itself were demanding answers. Sirens wailed in the distance, fading in and out, their echoes dissolving into the thick, restless darkness. Somewhere beneath that storm, a truth long buried was beginning to breathe again. Inspector Lam stood alone in his office, the only light coming from a flickering desk lamp. The case board loomed before him, a chaotic constellation of faces, names, and blood-red strings. At the center, Nguyen Hai An's photograph stared back with haunting stillness. 15 years. 15 years of silence, lies, and carefully arranged shadows. Colonel Huang's death had changed everything. This was no longer just a cold case reopened. This was a war against an enemy who had learned how to erase people. Lam's phone vibrated sharply, breaking the silence. A text message. No number. Just coordinates, a time, and a single sentence. If you want the truth, come alone. Lam didn't hesitate. The address led him to the abandoned freight yard on the southern edge of the city, a skeletal landscape of rusted containers, broken cranes, and twisted rail tracks swallowed by weeds. Wind howled through the hollow metal shells, carrying the scent of oil, rain, and decay. The place felt suspended between life and death, forgotten by time. A single figure stood beneath a flickering floodlight.
Chan Minh Khan.
His tailored suit was soaked, clinging to his frame, the polished image of the celebrated businessman stripped away by rain and fear. His face was pale, eyes sunken, breath unsteady. Lam stepped forward, boots crunching against gravel. You sent the message, Lam said, voice low.
Hang Xoa Lao.
They're coming for me.
Who?
Kang laughed bitterly, the sound cracking. The same people who killed Hong. The same ones who buried him. The wind surged, rattling the metal walls around them, amplifying every word. You killed her, Lam said.
Han Ferlin chết. No.
I didn't mean to. A pause stretched, thick and suffocating. She was pregnant, Kang whispered. The word struck like a bullet. Lam felt the air leave his lungs. What? She came to see me that night. She said the child was mine. His hands trembled violently. I panicked. I had a fiancé. My family's reputation. Everything I'd built. She said she would tell the police. Tell everyone. Rain streaked down his face, indistinguishable from tears. I just wanted her to stay quiet. We argued near the canal. I grabbed her arm. She slipped, hit her head on the concrete edge. She fell into the water.
His voice collapsed.
I tried to pull her out. I swear I did. But the current was strong. I couldn't reach her. Silence engulfed them, broken only by the relentless rain. And then,
Làm đê màn đét.
Kang's jaw tightened. I called Colonel Hong. My father had helped him years earlier during a political scandal. He owed us. A hollow laugh escaped. Hong arrived within minutes. He saw the body, the blood, the water. He said he would take care of everything. Lam's fists clenched. He staged it as an accident, Kang continued. Destroyed evidence. Threatened witnesses. The neighbors who heard us arguing, he paid them or scared them into silence. The police reports were rewritten. The case was closed in less than 2 weeks. And now? Lam asked. Kang's eyes darted to the darkness beyond the floodlight. Someone else was involved. Someone higher. Hong wasn't acting alone. He was just the shield. A sudden metallic click echoed behind Lam. "Don't move." Lam turned slowly. A man emerged from the shadows, tall, broad-shouldered, his face hidden beneath a hood. A silenced pistol was aimed steadily at Lam's chest. Kang's breath hitched. "They found us." The gunman advanced one step. "You weren't supposed to speak," he said calmly. Lam raised his hands slightly, keeping his voice even. "Who are you?" "A cleaner," the man replied. "I erase mistakes." In one swift motion, he fired.
Lam dove sideways.
The bullet tore through the air where his heart had been a second earlier, shattering the floodlight. Darkness swallowed the yard. Another shot rang out.
Hang scream.
Lam hit the ground hard, gravel tearing into his palms. He rolled, drawing his weapon, firing blindly toward the muzzle flashes. Metal shrieked as bullets ricocheted off containers. The gunman vanished into the maze of shadows. Lam scrambled up, sprinting toward Kang. Kang lay on his back, blood blooming across his white shirt, eyes wide with shock. "They'll kill my family," Kang gasped. "Protect my wife, my son." Lam knelt beside him, pressing down on the wound. "Stay with me." Kang's gaze fixed on the black sky. "And I'm sorry." His body went still. The rain washed his blood across the gravel, carrying it into the cracks of the earth, as if the ground itself were trying to swallow the truth once more. By dawn, the freight yard was sealed off. Forensics teams moved through the wreckage, photographing shell casings, measuring blood trails, reconstructing a story written in chaos. But Lam already knew. Kang's confession had blown open a door that could never again be closed. The question was no longer who killed Nguyen Ha. It was who had the power to bury the truth for 15 years and murder anyone who tried to unearth it. Ha Vai listened in stunned silence as Lam recounted the night. Her knuckles whitened around her recorder. "This goes far beyond one corrupt officer," she said. "We're dealing with an entire network." Lam nodded. "And they know we're coming." Across the city, anonymous accounts began leaking fragments of the story. Old police logs, redacted autopsy reports, financial records linking Colonel Han to offshore accounts. Every revelation sent shockwaves through the media. Headlines erupted. Texas 2003 cold case reopened. Unexpected arrest stuns entire town. Corruption network suspected in teen's death. Who is silencing witnesses? The community reeled. Families who had trusted the police felt betrayed. Former witnesses stepped forward, emboldened by the cracks appearing in the system. New testimonies poured in, each one adding another layer to the dark architecture of deception. But for every voice that spoke, another fell silent. A retired forensic analyst was found dead in his bathtub. Official cause: suicide. A former patrol officer vanished without a trace. And late one night, Ha Vai discovered her apartment door slightly ajar, a single black rose placed carefully on her desk. No note, just a warning. Sleep became impossible. Lam spent his nights replaying the gunshots, the fear in Kang's eyes, the weight of a truth soaked in blood. The enemy was invisible, omnipresent, always one step ahead. Then, a breakthrough. A young cybercrime analyst uncovered encrypted communications between Colonel Hong and a private security firm operating under a shell corporation. The trail led to one name: Marcus Hale, an American expatriate, former intelligence contractor, now the discreet owner of several consulting companies across Southeast Asia. A man who specialized in cleaning messes no one else could. The symbol found in Huang's house, the triangle slashed by a line, was Hale's signature. The ghost in the files finally had a face. Lam studied Hale's photograph late into the night. Cold eyes.
No emotion.
A predator's calm. "This is the man who killed Kang," Ha Vai said. "And Hong. And God knows how many others."
Lam esa let so lao.
Then this is where it ends. But even as he spoke, he knew better. Because men like Hale didn't just disappear. They made people disappear. And somewhere in the dark, Marcus Hale was already planning his next move. In a luxury hotel overlooking the river, Hale stood by the window, city lights glittering below like scattered diamonds. He sipped his whiskey, expression unreadable, as news of the freight yard shooting scrolled across a muted television screen. "They're getting close," a voice said behind him. Hale didn't turn. "Let them." He set the glass down, gaze fixed on the flowing water far below. "Truth is only dangerous when people believe it," he said softly. "And belief can be erased." His phone vibrated. A new message. Phase 2. A thin smile curved across his lips. The storm returned before dawn, thunder rolling like distant artillery. Rain lashed against windows, blurring the city into a smear of shadow and light. Somewhere beneath that rain, the ghosts of the past stirred, restless, furious, demanding justice. And the battle for a 15-year-old truth was about to claim its next victims. The city no longer slept. It only waited. Streetlights burned through the night like tired eyes that refused to close, illuminating empty sidewalks slick with rain, shattered glass, and unspoken fear. Somewhere behind those windows, families whispered, journalists typed in silence, and detectives stared at walls filled with photographs of the dead. The reopened cold case had crossed a line. Now it was no longer an investigation. It was a manhunt. And Inspector Lamb knew with chilling certainty that he and Havai were no longer the hunters. They were the prey. The first warning came at 3:17 a.m. A single gunshot shattered the stillness outside Lamb's apartment. He woke instantly, heart slamming against his ribs, rolling from the bed just as the window exploded inward. Glass rained across the floor. A bullet embedded itself deep into the concrete wall behind his pillow. A message. No words. Only intent. Lamb lay frozen for 3 seconds, counting his breaths, then rose, weapon drawn, scanning the dark street below. A motorcycle's engine screamed in the distance, fading into the maze of alleys.
Marcus Hale.
The cleaner. He wasn't hiding anymore. By sunrise, Lamb and Havai were operating from a safe house provided by Internal Affairs, a concrete bunker tucked beneath an abandoned municipal building. Surveillance cameras monitored every corridor. Armed officers guarded every entrance. Still, the air inside felt thin, fragile, as if a single crack could shatter the illusion of safety. Havai paced the narrow room, fingers trembling as she refreshed her encrypted inbox. "They're wiping everything," she said. "Servers are being erased. Financial records. Call logs. Anything that links Hale to Hong or Kang." Lamb studied the glowing monitors. "He's collapsing the network." "No," she corrected. "He's cutting loose ends." A pause. "And we're the last ones left." They pushed deeper. Every surviving officer, witness, clerk, and forensic technician connected to the original case was quietly relocated, placed under protective custody. Even so, fear followed them like a shadow. A former evidence handler refused to testify, barricading himself inside his home until police broke down the door. He sat rocking in the corner, repeating the same words over and over. "They watch. They always watch." Another witness, an elderly shop owner who remembered seeing and arguing with a man near the canal, collapsed during questioning, his heart giving out under the weight of 15 years of terror. Truth was surfacing, but it was bleeding. Then came the leak. A confidential internal memo detailing the link between Marcus Hale, Colonel Hong, and a multinational security firm appeared online, published by an anonymous source. Within minutes, it spread across every major news outlet. Headlines screamed, "Shadow Network Exposed in Texas 2003 Cold Case." Who is Marcus Hale? Did private mercenaries bury a murder? Public outrage erupted like wildfire. Protesters gathered outside police headquarters, demanding arrests, resignations, justice. Politicians scrambled. International agencies requested briefings. Hale's name became poison. And poison men strike hardest when cornered. Havai received the video at 11:42 p.m.
No sender. No explanation.
Just a single file. She hesitated, then pressed play. The screen flickered to life, revealing a dimly lit room. A man sat bound to a chair, blood streaking down his temple. His face was swollen, one eye barely open. It was the cybercrime analyst, the one who had traced Hale's encrypted network. A shadow stepped into frame. The camera tilted upward, revealing Marcus Hale.
Cold.
Unhurried.
Predatory.
You want truth, Hale said calmly, his voice smooth as ice. This is the cost. He placed a pistol against the analyst's head. The video cut to black. Havai screamed. Within minutes, Lamb mobilized every unit available. Cell towers were triangulated. Traffic cameras combed. Satellites requested. The city became a grid of glowing coordinates, each one a possible grave. They found the location 20 minutes later, an abandoned meatpacking factory near the river. By the time they breached the doors, it was too late. The analyst lay dead, execution style. A single bullet.
Clean.
Efficient. On the wall behind him, written in blood, was the symbol of the triangle, slashed by a line.
A signature.
A declaration of war. That night, Lamb sat alone in the safe house, hands locked together, jaw clenched until it ached. He replayed the footage in his mind, again and again, the casual cruelty of Hale's eyes, the certainty that he was untouchable. Havai stood beside him, her voice barely a whisper. We can't protect everyone. Lamb closed his eyes. Then we end this fast. The breakthrough came from an unexpected place. A junior accountant in Singapore, working for one of Hale's shell corporations, panicked after seeing the headlines. Fear cracked her loyalty. She transmitted a hidden ledger to Havai through an anonymous channel. The files mapped an entire assassination economy: payments, identities, locations, dates. And one address stood out: a riverside villa, registered under a false name, scheduled for a massive fund transfer in 48 hours. His exit, Havai said.
Lamb not dead.
Or his headquarters. Either way, it was their only chance. The operation was assembled in total secrecy. No official channels. No paper trail. Only a small, hand-picked team that Lamb trusted with his life. Before leaving, Havai stopped him at the door. If this goes wrong, Lamb shook his head. It won't, but his eyes betrayed him. The villa loomed above the river, a modern fortress of glass and steel. Floodlights scanned the grounds. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter. Motion sensors pulsed silently beneath manicured grass. A private army. Lamb's team infiltrated through the drainage system, emerging beneath the structure like ghosts. Breaching charges detonated. Windows shattered. Alarms screamed. The night erupted into chaos. Gunfire echoed through marble halls. Smoke filled the air. Shadows clashed at arm's length. Lamb moved with mechanical focus, clearing room after room, heart hammering, every sense sharpened to a razor edge. They reached the top floor. The command center. Empty. Computers still warm. Coffee steaming on a desk. Security feeds looping. Hale had been there. Minutes ago. A voice crackled through the intercom. Impressive, Hale said. His face appeared on every screen, calm, composed, unbothered. You should have stayed buried, Inspector. Lamb stared back. Where are you?
Hale similet feindli.
Closer than you think. The feed cut. At that instant, the building shuddered. Explosions tore through the lower levels. Support columns failed. Glass and steel screamed as gravity took hold. Evacuate, Lamb shouted. They ran. Fire chased them down the stairwell. Debris collapsed. Smoke swallowed everything. Lamb dove through a window, crashing into the river below as the villa imploded behind him, vanishing beneath a roaring column of flame and water. He surfaced gasping, ears ringing, lungs burning, watching the inferno reflect across the black river. Hale had escaped. Again. But he had also made a mistake. He had shown his hand. He was no longer a rumor. No longer a shadow. He was a target. By dawn, the city stood on edge. The official story spoke of a gas explosion. The truth pulsed beneath the surface, electric, volatile. Marcus Hale had declared himself an enemy of the state, and the manhunt had become global. Lamb stood at the riverbank, soaked, bruised, staring at the drifting debris. Havai joined him, wrapping a blanket around his shoulders.
He's running, she said.
Lamb shook his head slowly. No, he replied. He's preparing his final move. The wind swept across the water, carrying the faint smell of smoke and gunpowder. Somewhere beyond the horizon, a predator was planning his endgame. And the ghosts of a 15-year-old girl waited for justice. The city woke beneath a sky the color of old bruises, clouds hanging low and heavy, pressing down on rooftops and streets as if the atmosphere itself were burdened by everything it had witnessed. Smoke from the ruined villas still lingered above the river, a faint, bitter haze drifting between skyscrapers and low-rise blocks, reminding everyone that something irreversible had begun. Inspector Lamb stood in a temporary command center assembled inside a sealed government building, staring at a digital map that pulsed with live data. Satellite feeds, border crossings, financial transactions. Every movement, every signal, every whisper that could betray Marcus Hale's location was being hunted, dissected, cross-referenced. The room hummed with restrained urgency, keyboards clattering, voices murmuring in clipped, coded exchanges. No one raised their tone. No one wasted breath. They all understood. This was the final stretch. Hale had slipped through their fingers once more, but his escape had been neither clean nor quiet. The explosion at the villa had shaken the entire network. Funds were frozen. Shell companies collapsed. Communications went dark. The empire he had built on silence and blood was fracturing, and fractures created pressure. Pressure forced mistakes. Lamb leaned closer to the main screen, eyes tracing a cluster of reds blinking near the coastline. Private airstrips. Unregistered boats. Shadow accounts flaring to life and vanishing again. He's not fleeing, Lamb murmured. He's consolidating. Havai stood beside him, her face drawn, dark circles beneath her eyes, fingers clenched around a cup of cold coffee. He's gathering everything he needs for one final move. Money, documents,
People.
weapons, and leverage, Lamb added. Havai met his gaze. Us. The word hung in the air like a loaded gun. At 2:14 a.m., the first piece of the trap snapped into place. An anonymous transfer lit up on the financial grid, $7 million funneled through 3 offshore accounts, rebounding through Macau, and landing in a dormant company registered in Panama. The digital trail was unmistakable. It bore Hale's signature architecture, layered, obfuscated, but arrogant in its complexity. He wants us to see it, Havai said.
Lam not that allow.
He's signaling. Within minutes, another alert followed. A single encrypted message intercepted on a dead channel. 48 hours. Come alone, or the truth dies with you. Attached was a still image. Havai's blood ran cold. It showed her mother's apartment. The front door. Unlocked. A thin shadow visible in the hallway beyond. Lamb's hand closed around her wrist before she could move. He wants you to panic, he said quietly.
Abeba brachu.
He already has. Lamb held her gaze. We do this on our terms. She swallowed, nodding once, forcing herself back from the edge. Within seconds, the command center transformed. Every available unit was redeployed.
Surveillance grid recalibrated.
Drone patrols launched. Facial recognition algorithms combed millions of images, hunting for even the faintest trace of Hale's operatives. The trap was being set, and Hale was walking straight into it. They traced the signal to a decommissioned offshore oil platform, 50 miles from the coast, long abandoned, officially condemned, its skeletal structure jutting from the ocean like a rusted crown.
No lights.
No registered traffic. No reason for anyone to be there. Except for a man who thrived where no one else dared to look. Isolated. Controlled. Hard to approach, Havai said, studying the satellite feed. Lamb's jaw tightened. And perfect for an execution. A storm system was forming above the Gulf, vast and violent, its spiral arms stretching across the horizon. In 12 hours, winds would reach hurricane force. Waves would swallow small craft. Helicopter access would become nearly impossible. Hale had chosen his battlefield, and he had timed it with surgical precision. They launched at dusk. A stealth cutter sliced through the darkening water, its engines muffled, its lights extinguished. Lamb stood at the bow, the cold spray stinging his face, eyes locked on the distant silhouette of the oil platform rising from the sea like a blackened skeleton. Havai stood beside him, armored vest strapped tight, recorder secured beneath her jacket. Her hands were steady. Her heart was not. Neither spoke. The wind howled louder as they drew closer, the storm's breath brushing across the waves, foreshadowing the violence to come. They boarded the platform in silence, grappling hooks biting into rusted steel, boots landing softly on corroded walkways slick with salt and algae. The structure groaned beneath their weight, a dying beast protesting its final intrusion. Inside, darkness swallowed them. Lamb signaled forward. They advanced through narrow corridors choked with cables and decaying machinery, their footsteps muffled, weapons raised, every breath measured. Then, without warning, floodlights erupted. The corridor exploded into white. "Welcome, Inspector." Marcus Hale's voice echoed through hidden speakers, calm, composed, almost amused. "You made it." I was beginning to worry. Steel doors slammed shut at both ends of the corridor. Hydraulic locks hissed into place.
Trapped.
Havai's pulse thundered in her ears. Lamb lifted his chin. "Where is she?" A soft chuckle rippled through the speakers. "Safe. For now." A screen flickered to life at the far end of the corridor. Havai's mother sat bound to a chair, unharmed but terrified, eyes darting wildly. "Touch me," Hale said gently, "and she dies." Lamb lowered his weapon a fraction. "Good," Hale murmured. "Now we can talk." They were led into the platform's central control chamber, a cavernous space filled with dormant consoles and hanging cables, illuminated by the pale glow of emergency lighting. Hale stood at the center, flanked by 4 armed men, his posture relaxed, his expression unreadable. Time seemed to slow. Lamb felt the weight of 15 years press against his chest. The girl in the canal, the broken witnesses, the murdered analyst, the river of lies. "This ends now," Lamb said. Hale's eyes glittered. "It ended long ago. You're just late to the funeral." He gestured, and a projector whirred to life, casting images onto a massive curved screen. Police reports, autopsy photos, financial ledgers,
Surveillance stills.
a comprehensive archive of corruption, blackmail, murder, and manipulation. "Every secret," Hale said softly. "Every sin. Every transaction. I built an empire on what people were desperate to hide, and they paid me to protect it." Havai stared at the screen, horror and fury battling in her chest. "You destroyed lives." Hale tilted his head. "I preserved reputations. There's a difference." Lamb stepped forward. "You killed Nguyen Haiyan." A flicker of something passed behind Hale's eyes. Annoyance. Nothing more. She was collateral. A trivial spark that ignited a very profitable fire. The word struck like a blade. Lamb's restraint snapped. Before the guards could react, he lunged, slamming into Hale, driving him back against a console. Gunfire erupted. Alarms screamed. The chamber descended into chaos. Bullets tore through metal. Glass shattered. Sparks rained from severed cables. Lamb and Hale grappled, fists crashing, breath burning, each blow fueled by years of rage and survival. Hale fought with ruthless efficiency, striking at joints, nerves, vulnerable points. Lamb countered with raw force, refusing to yield. They crashed through a railing, tumbling onto a lower platform. Hale rolled to his feet, drawing a concealed blade. Lamb rose slowly, blood trickling from a cut above his eye. They circled. 2 predators. 1 truth. Hale struck. Lamb blocked, pain exploding up his arm, twisting, driving an elbow into Hale's ribs. Bone cracked. Hale staggered, snarling, slashing again. The blade grazed Lamb's shoulder, slicing fabric and flesh. Lamb grabbed Hale's wrist, wrenching it sideways, the knife clattering to the floor. He drove his fist into Hale's face.
Once. Twice. Hale collapsed, gasping.
Lamb pressed his boot against Hale's throat, weapon aimed at his head. "Where is she?" Lamb demanded. Hale laughed, blood pooling at the corner of his mouth. "You won't shoot." Lamb's finger tightened. Havai's voice rang out.
Lamb.
He hesitated. That moment was all Hale needed. A hidden charge detonated. The platform convulsed. Steel screamed. The ocean surged upward. Water flooded the lower levels in seconds. Alarms blared. Emergency lights flickered wildly. Hale vanished into the chaos. Lamb spun, shouting orders, dragging injured officers toward the exit as waves crashed through shattered bulkheads. The storm had arrived early, battering the structure, tearing at it with merciless force. They fought their way through rising water, clambering up ladders, crawling across collapsing walkways, lungs burning, muscles screaming. Above them, thunder detonated. Below them, the sea waited. They reached the upper deck as the platform began to tilt, its foundations failing, its decades-old bones finally surrendering. Helicopter blades thundered overhead, battling the storm, lowering cables through sheets of rain. One by one, survivors were hoisted into the air. Lamb turned back, scanning the chaos. "Hail!" he roared. Only darkness answered. Then, through the storm, he saw a figure at the far edge of the platform, standing calmly as the structure crumbled beneath his feet.
Marcus Hale.
Their eyes met across the void. Hale raised one hand, a mock salute. Then he stepped backward, into the raging sea. The platform collapsed moments later, swallowed by waves and fire, vanishing beneath the storm like a myth erased by time. Lamb clung to the cable as the helicopter lifted him skyward, his gaze locked on the churning black water below.
Gone.
No body.
No proof.
Only the echo of a smile and the bitter taste of unfinished justice. Hours later, as dawn crept through the storm clouds, Lamb and Havai stood on the deck of a rescue vessel, soaked, exhausted, staring at the empty horizon. "Is he dead?" Havai asked quietly. Lamb didn't answer. The ocean offered no certainty, only silence. And in that silence, the ghost of a 15-year-old girl still waited. The storm receded as suddenly as it had arrived, leaving behind a vast, trembling quiet that stretched across the ocean. Gray light seeped through torn clouds, washing the world in muted silver. The waves still rolled, heavy and restless, but the violence had passed. What remained was aftermath, broken metal drifting across dark water, fragments of a shattered platform bobbing like the bones of a sunken giant. Inspector Lamb stood at the edge of the rescue vessel, his hands gripping the cold railing, eyes fixed on the empty horizon. The sea swallowed everything without discrimination: guilt, innocence, monsters, heroes. Somewhere beneath that churning surface, Marcus Hale might be dead. Or alive. The ocean refused to answer. Behind him, Havai wrapped a thermal blanket tighter around her shoulders. Salt crusted her hair. Her face was pale, hollowed by exhaustion and shock, but her eyes remained painfully alert, scanning the water as if the truth might suddenly rise to the surface. "It's over," one of the officers murmured. Lamb didn't respond. Because some endings don't close. They linger. Back on land, the city awaited them in uneasy silence. Streets that once throbbed with traffic now moved cautiously, as though afraid to disturb something that might still be watching. News screens glowed inside darkened apartments, broadcasting the same images on endless repeat: the burning offshore platform, the shattered steel, the violent waves, the missing body. Marcus Hale, presumed dead. 2 words that offered comfort. And no certainty. Protests subsided, replaced by somber vigils. Candles lined sidewalks outside police headquarters. Handwritten signs clung to rain-soaked walls. Justice Furin. Never forget. No more silence. For 15 years, Nguyen Hai and had been a statistic, a faded photograph, a file gathering dust. Now her name pulsed through the city, etched into its collective memory like a scar. Her parents stood at the front of every vigil, their faces carved by grief and time. They held her portrait between them, fingers trembling, eyes searching the crowd as if hoping their daughter might emerge from it, unchanged, untouched by death. She never did. The trials began within weeks. What Hale had built did not die with him. Evidence recovered from the platform servers detonated across government agencies, corporate boardrooms, police departments, and private security firms. Names tumbled into the public domain, politicians, executives, judges, officers, an entire ecosystem of corruption suddenly stripped of its armor. Arrests followed. Resignations. Disappearances. Some suspects fled the country. Others locked themselves inside fortified estates. A few chose the final escape. But the machine kept moving. And it consumed them all. In a sealed courtroom, behind bulletproof glass and layers of armed guards, the truth of Nguyen Hai An's final night was spoken aloud for the first time. Witnesses testified. Neighbors recounted the argument by the canal. Forensic experts reconstructed the fall, the impact, the current that had pulled her under. Financial analysts traced the bribes, the hush payments, the manipulated reports. Her death, once labeled an accident, was formally reclassified. Homicide. The word echoed through the chamber, a verdict and a resurrection. Kang was declared legally responsible. Colonel Huang's legacy collapsed. But Hale remained a shadow. Unproven. Unburied. Vi published her investigation in full. Every document. Every recording. Every photograph. The article shattered readership records within hours, translated into 12 languages overnight, consumed by millions who had never known Anne's name before, who now whispered it like a prayer. She did not write with anger. She wrote with precision. Cold facts. Relentless timelines. Unavoidable conclusions. The story did not accuse. It exposed. And exposure, in a world built on secrecy, was the cruelest weapon of all. Lamb returned to his office for the first time in months. The walls were bare. The case board had been dismantled. No photographs.
No screens.
Only a single framed image remained on his desk. Nguyen Hai An. Young. Smiling.
Alive.
He stood before it in silence, the weight of every decision pressing against his chest. He had chased the truth across 15 years of lies, through blood and fire and storm, and still it felt unfinished, like a sentence cut short. Because Hale had vanished. No body had been recovered. No DNA. No remains. Just the ocean. And the ocean kept secrets better than any man. Weeks passed. Then months. The city tried to heal. Life resumed its routines. Traffic returned. Markets buzzed. Neon signs blinked back to life. The extraordinary slowly retreated into memory, becoming history, then rumor, then cautionary tale. But for Lamb, every shadow seemed sharper. Every unfamiliar face lingered too long. Every sudden sound tightened his spine. Some predators never die. They wait. One evening, as dusk bled across the skyline, Lamb received a package. No return address. No postage mark. Hand-delivered. Inside lay a single object. A USB drive. And beneath it, a folded slip of paper. On it, written in precise, elegant handwriting, were 4 words. Truth always survives. Lamb's blood chilled. He stared at the familiar symbol beneath the message. The downward-pointing triangle, slashed by a single line. Havi read it over his shoulder. Neither spoke. Neither needed to. The file on the drive contained surveillance footage. Grainy. Time-stamped 2 days earlier. A man disembarking from a cargo ship in a distant port city, his face partially obscured by a cap and sunglasses, his posture unmistakable.
Marcus Hale, alive.
Watching, waiting, Lamb closed his eyes, not in despair, in resolve. The hunt had never ended. It had only changed shape. Somewhere beyond the reach of law, beyond the borders of jurisdiction and certainty, a man built his next identity, erased his old footprints, and prepared to become a ghost once more. And somewhere in a quiet city, a detective and a journalist stared into the abyss of unfinished justice, knowing the truth they had uncovered would never allow them to rest. Because cold cases do not truly end. They linger. They whisper. They wait. For the next storm. For the next confession. For the next name to fall. And in the silence that followed, the echo of a young woman's final breath still drifted through the night, demanding to be heard. Forever.